Hello, welcome to the live stream for November 1st, 2017. I'm your host, Dana Morningstar. And let's see, I changed some settings around, so let's see if I did things right. Shauna is here. Diactra is here. Welcome, welcome. Let's see, can you guys hear me okay? SP is here. Marilyn. Okay. Manju, Karen, Monica, Gamer Christina. Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it. Gamer Christina says, amazing book, Dana. Thank you so much. I am so relieved to hear that. I seriously can't even begin to tell you. I was in my writers group earlier today, and I was telling them, it's so weird how I didn't expect to feel so anxious about people reading my book. And it's been totally nerve-wracking, waiting to hear back from people and waiting to hear reviews and pins and needles. So I'm really glad that you like it and that it's been helpful and all that. So speaking of which, speaking of the book, I just realized earlier today that I can do a free book promo. So I'm doing that starting tomorrow. So if you haven't gotten the book and cost is a factor and you would like to read the book, it's going to be for free on Amazon for the next 3 days. So now that I know that that's a thing, I only have 5 days I can set it for free. I don't know how often, if that's every quarter or every year or kind of what, but I think what I'd like to start doing is making the first day of every month will be a free day. So I don't know. I still need to figure all that out, but that's the direction I'm going to be moving in, I think. Yeah. So that book, just real quick, covers so much. It covers a ton of frequently asked questions. It covers pretty much all of the terminology that you're going to be hearing in a support group or that you hear me talk about, or that I think is helpful in piecing all of this together. It's basically the book that I wished I'd had back when I was going through everything. I mean, it covers a lot of ground. So I highly recommend reading it. And if you want to pick it up while it's free, head over to Amazon tomorrow for the next 3 days. So it's, what is that? November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th is when it'll be free. And lots of new people. Oh, daylight savings time. Is it daylight saving? Okay, no. It's not. I don't know. I'm in this huge vortex. Let's see. Isaiah says, do you know of adults that struggle with abuse from a childhood? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think most adults that have gone through some sort of abuse still struggle with it, even in adulthood. Because it's one of those things and even if it's addressed, even if it's treated, it stays with the person. So it's not like it ever really goes away. It's just more of as an adult, you can learn, sort of like being in a car accident. Things are just different. They don't have to be worse. They're just different after that accident. And you have to just kind of learn how to navigate life differently. So very, very common. There's lots of different support groups out there for adults that have been abused in particular. But I think you'll find too that a lot of adults that are in kind of regular, quote unquote, regular support groups for narcissistic abuse have been abused as children. Very, very common. Micah says, will you post the free link from Amazon? I can do that tomorrow morning once it goes free. So you can find my book. I should tell you the title of the book. That would help, right? The title is Start Here. And then what is the subtitle? It's a crash course guide to understanding, navigating, and healing from narcissistic abuse. And it's my name. So Dana Morningstar. But yeah, I'll post the link. I need to make a note of that to myself. Post a link in the comments down below. Link to book. Oh my goodness, Celeste. Hello, welcome. Kasuda Yuki is joining the live stream from Japan. Fantastic. Very Grumpy says, hi, Dana. You're such a beautiful and strong woman for all you went through. I'm thankful to hear your voice and streams, sometimes when I can't sleep. Well, welcome. Welcome. And thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Isaiah says, yes, I had narcissistic parents that were abusive emotionally, verbally, and physically. I think there's a lot of people in all kinds of adult support groups that have gone through something similar. Chris says, yeah, you finally got a new chair. Yes, it's a very simple chair, but it's not squeaky. So that's a huge plus. And Najala, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. Najala says, it's hard to trust people after such an experience. Yes, it really is. But, here's the thing too with that is what I have found with most people, myself included, is what they're really saying with that is that they can't instantly trust people like they used to. And this was something that used to really upset me for a very long time. Like, I used to take people at face value. I used to just be very quick to trust other people. And I just thought that's what everybody else did. And a lot of people do that, but that doesn't make it healthy. And one of the big kind of aha moments from all of this has been with the realization of trust is something that's earned. It's not something that's given. And to slow down, especially when you're dating people, especially online dating, because anybody can pretend to be anything online. So it's really important to just go slow. So, but it took me a while to regain that trust. I think what helped the most, though, for me to regain that trust was in learning to trust myself. Because once I realized that I could trust myself enough to walk away from a situation if it became problematic in any way, or if it simply wasn't right enough for me, then I was relying on myself to keep myself safe. I wasn't relying on other people to be safe people. Like, they're going to be who they're going to be. And then I'm going to respond accordingly. So there was a lot of power that came from that, just realizing that I had the ability to keep myself safe. And once I had that, then it was a lot easier to kind of interact with other people, knowing, that I could get up and leave, that nothing is worth my safety or my sanity. And I'm not going to go through that again, with somebody. So. Okay, let me scroll up here. Oh, thank you, Christina. She says, right in the beginning of your book, it was very eye-opening. You wrote about 3 types of people in kind of this abuse cycle: the clarity seekers, the support or strategy seekers, and the support and strategy givers. I love your words. Well, thank you. I'm glad it helps. Writing a book in general, especially for me, this book, it was my first real book. And I'd written things before, but nothing that was so emotionally intense for me. And kind of by the end of it, when you read through it multiple times and you have other people read it, and there's just kind of this whole process with writing a book. And, by the end of it, you kind of wonder if your words even make sense anymore, or if you're being too redundant, or if you're being, you just don't know. That's the struggle. That's what I was talking with my writers group earlier. I said, like, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I having all of this anxiety about actually like promoting my book and talking to people about it? And I said, I have a YouTube channel, I have a podcast, I have a blog, I have a very large Facebook group. Like, it's not like this is my first time kind of putting myself out there. I mean, everything I do talks about my experiences in, a lot of depth. So it's not that I'm scared to be vulnerable or to be open about this kind of stuff. Like, I just couldn't figure it out. And another writer in my group had said, she's like, I think what it is when you write a book, unlike a YouTube video or a podcast that people might kind of have on in the background, or like they're engaging with that in a different way. When they're reading a book, you're alone with the reader, and they are 100% alone with your words. And it's a very intimate thing compared to like a YouTube video or a podcast or even a blog. Like, they're putting aside, hours upon hours of their time to kind of be with you, and it's hard too, because I can't, because I'm not there to kind of explain or answer questions or maybe even like justify or defend what I wrote. So, and you never know how people are going to take things. You have to kind of just wait and get feedback. It's sort of funny. Like, at the end of every single live stream, my boyfriend will ask me, he's like, "Hey, how did it go?" And every single week I'm like, I don't know. Because I've learned that my perspective of things, like how I think something went and how it actually went, are two very different things. So it's interesting how that happens. Like, I have a message that I want to convey, but I don't know if it's going to land the way that I want it to land. And so that's something that I do in all of my live streams and even in my groups and that's kind of, I guess, the benefit of the live streams is getting comments. And you can kind of tell, like, okay, this hit a certain note with some people, or this didn't land in the way that I intended to, or I could feel myself stumbling over words or kind of looking for clarity on a certain topic. And then, I don't know, like, as you go through it, you kind of realize, okay, I need to really refine this area, or somebody brought up a really great point that I hadn't thought about. Or what happens often, which gives me massive anxiety, is I know the intention of what I want to say, but when you're dealing with manipulative behavior and people that have been manipulated, it's very easy for that message to get twisted and skewed. And so that was one of my concerns too, is like, I don't want somebody to read what I said and then take it in a weird way that's not intended, but then they feel re-victimized, or somehow my words get twisted and used against them. So I don't know. It's just a lot with all that. Okay, let me see. Let me scroll down. Oh, good. Thank you, Lauren. Lauren says, Dana, your live streams go great and definitely resonate with me. And your book is resonating with me too. Yay. That's huge. That's huge. Because, like I said, you don't know until you start getting feedback from people. Kathleen says, do you get discouraged if you don't get your message through? It's not so much discouraged, I guess. It's more maybe a little bit overwhelmed and panicky. Panicky because it's on the internet and stuff travels so fast, because once I've put this out there, like, there is no pulling it back. Like, it's out there. And and then it reaches so many people. This was one of the things I struggled with early on when I realized people were actually watching my videos, was kind of this panic of, it's weird. It's weird how you change when you realize people are actually watching you. You kind of realize that, I don't know. For me, I really found like I really need to make damn sure what I'm saying. And I really need to, I put a lot of pressure on myself to, like, I need to really figure out, all of the different ways that my message can be skewed or taken in the wrong way or spun around to actually hurt somebody. Because, there's lots of abusive people that are out there. And I just like that scares me. So when I was writing my book, because I have 2 books done now, the second book will probably be out in December. I decided I'm just going to go ahead and release it because if I don't, then I run the chance of what happened with the first book, which is me like rewriting it several more times because I start getting anxious about it. So I'm just going to put it out there. Yeah. But each time I went through it, I tried to write it. I wrote the first draft was what I wanted to say. And then I went through it again and I tried to read it through the lens of a person that was fresh out of the situation. And then I tried to read it through the lens of an abusive person and how they could potentially twist what I was saying. So I was trying to read it from multiple perspectives in order to kind of smooth out any potential issues or, kind of malintended things that could happen from it. So, yes, Standing Firm asked about the book and says, I think starting tomorrow, you can get it free for the next 3 days. Yes, starting tomorrow. I'll post a link down below. You can look for it or you can open it on Amazon now, but it'll say when it's free. But the book is called Start Here and it's by me, Dana Morningstar. So, well, thank you, Maria. Maria says, Dana, that's so fascinating that you question how your points land. You're so cautious and compassionate to never try to re-victimize people. You are incredibly good at making your points without being hurtful. Well, good. Thank you. It's something that's on the forefront of my mind all the time. And it's a challenge. I mean, like in my earlier videos, I mean, my God, like that was probably the worst feeling ever when I started making all these videos thinking that I would be primarily talking to straight women who had been in abusive relationships with men. And then I started hearing from, gay men, gay women, straight men, and in like teenagers too. So I hadn't thought about kind of all of these other people, different ages and different genders and sexual orientation that were struggling with this. And just kind of this realization of, oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Like, this was kind of like this unintended consequence of like me minimizing and invalidating a lot of people because I was only speaking from this one certain viewpoint. And so that, then I started from that point forward, making sure to really be as inclusive as possible with the different examples I give and how I approach my message and doing things very differently. And, because it was really, I don't know, it was really sad to get these emails from people and, and you just, I don't know, it's hard. It's a very hard learning curve to ride when you realize that you're trying to do something to spread awareness, but that, some people can be hurt in the process. And that's definitely not my intention. Phil asks, this has been my problem with the courts because because without a lawyer, it's hard to word things correctly and it often gets taken the wrong way. Any advice on how to word things better and prevent issues? I would see if you can contact like a free legal aid kind of place and run whatever you're going to do past them and see what they have to say, or post some certain things in a support group. But I would encourage you to kind of reverse engineer it. Like think about it if you were the judge or you were an attorney reading what you were going to write. How would they interpret that? So, and then kind of going from there. Because odds are if you can write it from in a way, and I guess paying attention to tone, how are you coming across in how you're writing it? Is it coming across that you're being bitter and jaded, or that you're an angry ex? Because even if you really are, but even if you're not, if that's how your message is being received, it's going to discredit your message. So really kind of sticking with the facts, staying as neutral as possible, not calling names. And that's the other challenge with abuse, is a lot of this terminology, we're not like trying to call a person a name. Like, this isn't to like degrade another person or to put them down. It's to try to describe what we went through. So if we're using terms like this person's a narcissist, or I went through narcissistic abuse or psychological abuse, a lot of other people that are not living this, to them, they're like, oh, you're, it's this kind of mindset of, oh, you're bitter and jaded, or, oh, you shouldn't be the one to describe that. Like, it should be a therapist to describe that instead of you calling it what it is. That's one of my main beefs with a lot of this stuff, is this idea of that we're not somehow able or qualified to be able to describe what we went through. And even though, yes, okay, right, like you need to have, technically, like you need to have, proper licensure in order to, like, quote unquote, diagnose somebody as like a narcissist or a sociopath. But you can speak towards the behavior. So you can say, my ex had a lot of, I would even avoid using terms like well, I mean, I guess you could, like narcissistic or sociopathic behavior. So instead of describing the person, I would describe the behavior, because if you describe the person, then it gets caught up in like, well, you're not qualified to say that, you're diagnosing, blah, blah. But if you talk to the behavior, then it's less, kind of like less subjective almost, like she was abusive, or she was very exploitative, or very hurtful, or these kinds of things. And then two, going to court, having a paper trail, having text messages, having emails, trying to make sure that what you're doing, that you have a paper trail for those kinds of things, especially if you're a guy, and especially if your ex is female. So, and really any combination of genders or sexual orientations, the more proof you have, the better off it's going to be. So that's what I would encourage you. Okay, good deal. Phil says, thanks, Dana. That helped a lot. Okay, good. Yeah, very grumpy says, and on another channel, I heard some advice about not mentioning words like narcissists and stuff like that, not coming across as crazy, but calm and cooperative. Yes. And that's the challenge, because when a person has been abused, what tends to happen is the abuser is like cool, calm, and collected. And then the target of the abuse is the one that's like unhinged, a total mess, frantic. And they can come across as though they really are the problem. They can come across as like, boy, this person's really unhinged. And to a person who's not familiar with abuse, it can seem like, yeah, no, actually, like that person seems like they're the live wire here, not the other person. So it's hard. It's hard to come across as being like cool, calm, and cooperative, especially if you have PTSD, and especially if you know that people are kind of analyzing your behavior while you're up there. But if you can just stick to the facts, and I would also encourage you to practice. If you're going into court and if you think your ex is going to say some like outrageous stuff about you, practice how you're going to handle that when you're knocked off balance, so you're not knocked off balance when the time actually comes, that you can handle these things. Or if your ex has said some really outrageous things in the past, to be the first one to bring that up. So if you can bring it up and if you can own it, it kind of takes the wind out of their sails because you've already brought it up. If you're familiar at all, it reminds me of the movie with Eminem, the old movie 8 Mile, if you're familiar with that movie. And in it, he's in the middle of this rap battle. And he's kind of getting dogged on throughout the movie. Like, he's white, he's his friend shot himself in the foot. Like, there was kind of all of these things that he didn't have a lot of street credit for. And so in this one rap battle, he brings all that up. He's like, yep, I'm white. Yep, my friend's an idiot. Yep, like, and it totally took the power away from the other guy that he was doing this rap battle with, because the guy had nothing on him, because he brought it up right up front and then he totally owned it. So, owning your stuff as much as you possibly can is huge. Phil says, yeah, it's the emotions that get me in the courtroom. Yeah. And they do anybody. We were talking about it, I think it was last week. There's this samurai warrior practice. I think it's called the Way of the Bushuda. And basically what it was is these samurai warriors would practice. They would practice going into battle, and they would actually practice kind of their final battle. And they would practice all the different ways that they could die, and how that they would basically die a warrior's death. I know that sounds really dark, okay? But the purpose of this is, so what they would do is they would go through, okay, this is, if you were to be, chopped up into a bunch of different pieces, or if you were to go up against this, it's 100 against you, rehearsing that in your mind. So you've already visualized it. So you don't panic into error when it actually comes down to it. And then that way you can actually fight a better fight because you've already visualized it. So for us, it's very similar in kind of facing your worst fears, really. Like, what are some of the worst things that a person can say? Whether this is your ex, whether this is at work, whether this is in your current relationship, what have you, kind of preparing yourself for all of these different things that you could say or do. So if it comes down to it, it's almost like kind of this Tai Chi approach. So you're preparing for it, and you can just effortlessly kind of just, move them out of the way, or move yourself out of the way. And you're just a lot more fluid. You're able to adapt and respond, instead of just be caught off guard and then react. Because most abusive people, they tend to know your triggers. And so they'll tend to go through those kinds of things. So for example, let's say, for example, you are a recovering alcoholic, or that you work 16 hours a day. So, and let's say your ex had criticized you about that before. So to prepare yourself for that, and to possibly even bring that up first in court, and own it, just own it. Yes, I work really long hours and I am passionate about my job, but I understand that my children are important. And so when they're here, I make an effort to, this is how I change my work schedule up. So you're acknowledging, yes, this is a concern. Yes, this is a valid concern. Yes, this is what I'm doing differently when they're around, because it's important that they have a father. It's important that you're present when you're there. And do you see what I'm saying? So like you're fully owning it. Or with the alcoholism, yes, I struggled with alcohol for 14 years, and I finally got into AA, and it's radically changed my life. It's something that I would have done much sooner. My alcoholism caused a lot of people a lot of pain, and I'm truly and sincerely remorseful for that. And my sobriety is a big thing in my life now. Like, I go to meetings once a week. I make sure I don't go to bars. I don't have alcohol in the house. Like, showing that you're owning it and that you're accountable for it really goes a long way. Okay, let's see. And Monica was asking about gray rock and such. And Monica, I don't know if you were on when we first got going, but my book is going to be free for the next 3 days. And in that, I discuss all of the different terminology: gray rock, no contact, low contact, all of that. So I would strongly encourage you to get a copy of the book, especially when it's free. Uh, and I will be posting a link down below. But if you want to open it up on your browser tab now, you can go to Amazon, and my name is Dana Morningstar, and the book is called Start Here. And I think you can look inside it now and flip through. The table of contents is extensive. So I did that because I wanted people to be able to just click to the place that they needed to read about at that point in time. So that's why it's such a massive table of contents. Brittany, great question, says, Dana, I have a question in regards to emotional abuse escalating to physical abuse. Would hitting the wall, grabbing my hand to hit himself in the face be pushing the boundary? My friends aren't alarmed. Yes, I would say so. The hitting the wall, that's a very common thing. Like, the purpose of that is it's fear inducing, right? It's like, look at how angry I am. I'm not going to hit you, but I'm still going to terrorize you. I'm going to hit the wall behind you, or I'm going to kick something. I'm going to have some sort of like physical outburst. It's still emotional terrorism as far as I'm concerned. And it's still very much a problem. And if a person gets to that level, they're not too far off. The next step is, tends to be like really getting rough with you, or them starting to hit you. And friends, other people that aren't familiar with abuse tend to gloss over this kind of stuff, because most people tend to think of, when they think of a physically abusive relationship, well, let me back up. When they think of an abusive relationship, they think of a really violent physical abusive relationship, sort of like, what was his name? Chris Brown and Rihanna. They think of that type of dynamic. Bruises all over her face. It's very obvious. I think, didn't they have video of it where he like drug her out of an elevator? I mean, really, like, no question about it, that's an abusive relationship. Or kind of the bad guy and Julia Roberts and Sleeping with the Enemy, where, because that bad guy looks like a bad guy. And what Chris Brown did was a really bad thing. And so there's no gray area there. Like, that was just 100%, like, that's an abusive relationship. But more often than not, relationships don't ever escalate to that point. They tend to be, there's a lot of like physical, or emotional, psychological, verbal abuse precedes all of that. Then when the physical abuse does start up, if it does get to that point, it tends to start off with like pinching, poking. I've heard people, their partner would wake up in the middle of the night and kick them really hard or punch them really hard and then pretend like they were sleeping. Grabbing them really rough on their arm. I have a friend of mine who was in a horrifically physically abusive relationship. And she said that the first moment they were walking out of the car to go see a movie, they were walking into the movie theater, and she doesn't even remember like what happened, but he grabbed her arm really rough. And it was at that moment she just thought, that's really weird. And then it started progressing to where he was, like I said, horrifically violent with her. And she ended up leaving the state because she was so terrified of that he would kill her. And he probably would have. He was a very violent guy. So I would take anything like that seriously. Any of that is worth, it really ideally would be a deal breaker kind of stuff. It's a problem. And other people don't wait for them to recognize that it's a problem. If it's a problem for you, then it's a problem. Like I said, a lot of physical abuse doesn't happen on the face. It might be punching in the arm. It might be kicking. It might be pinching. It might be holding somebody down. It might be threats. It might be punching things around them. threatening their family members, threatening their pets, threatening their children, showing up at their work, this kind of stuff. If you're in fear and love don't go together. If you're afraid of the person that you're with, then there's something horribly wrong there. And that's a really great sign that you are in an abusive relationship. So I would take that kind of stuff seriously. And, there's just no excusing that, because that kind of stuff escalates. Once a person has it in their mind, once they act on those impulses, then their behavior in their mind becomes okay. And because they're able to justify it. And that's why most abusive people will say, like, look at what you made me do, because in their mind, they're not accountable for what they've done. You've made them do that. But that's the twisted abuser mindset. That's not reality. Like, we all get frustrated, we all get angry, we all get upset, but it's never okay to be cruel, and it's never okay to lash out at somebody, or to start throwing things or punching or threatening or any of that. So abusive people tend to do that often. And then what happens also is if the target of that abuse isn't comfortable or able to leave, what they'll often do is they put up with it, because they're like, I'm stuck, I can't leave. What if it really is my fault? They're confused. And it's all of these mixed emotions. And so then the abuse gets worse and worse and worse. And they kind of get pushed and pushed and pushed emotionally till their breaking point. And then they start lashing out. And then that's when things get really crazy in a household where, both people start becoming abusive towards each other. And then it's just really this downward spiral. But really at that point, when the target starts abusing back, that's more of this, what's known as like reactive abuse. So their abuse is not from a place of power and control necessarily. It's more of I guess in a way it is kind of regaining their power and control. It's not trying to get power and control over the other person. It's more of like them trying to cope with this craziness that is their environment. Either way, it's a problem though. Okay, let me scroll down here. That's a very valid point. Sue says, yes, speeding the car when you are inside the car is also emotional terrorism. This is my narcissist's favorite tactic. Yeah, anything that's like fear inducing is incredibly, it's terrifying. It really is. Standing Firm says, and now I'm not physically abused, but the mental and emotional abuse is just as bad, if not worse. Yes, I would agree. There's a lot of people that I think go through verbal or emotional or psychological abuse, and they really feel in almost a twisted kind of way, like they wish they had been hit, because it was so they could have something concrete to point to and say, see, this is a problem. Like, this bruise proves that this is a problem, especially to other people, especially to themselves, because it's all of this confusion and mental anguish and crazy making of, is it me? Is it them? Who has the issue? Is this a relationship issue? And I don't know. And, is there anything I could do different? And how can I make this work? And just kind of all of this. And yeah, so a lot of targets often feel like, boy, I in a weird, sick way, I wish I could just be hit so I would know that it's time to leave. But I would encourage you to back things way up and realize that for anybody out there that's kind of struggling with this, to realize you don't need to wait until things get that bad in order to feel justified in leaving. Like, if a situation is perpetually confusing, if it's causing mental anguish, if you're feeling unsafe, if you're feeling like you're losing your mind, those are all reasons, very valid reasons to leave. So you've probably heard me talk before about, nothing is worth your safety or your sanity. Like those are two things I really encourage you to guard and value with everything that you have, because they're so valuable. And, to have that kind of be like one of your new, like lines in the sand of nothing is worth your safety or your sanity. It's those two things are very, very important. So if you're in this relationship where you're questioning your sanity, there's confusion, there's mental anguish, you feel like your personality is changing in a negative way, you're feeling ground down, or like you're like 100 years old, or just exhausted, anxious, or depressed, kind of any of these things are all signs that there's some stuff that's out of alignment there. And none of those emotions are present in a loving relationship. And for sure, fear, being the target of like rage attacks or feeling bullied, that does not go hand in hand with love. Brittany says, thanks for so much for answering my question about the physical abuse. You mentioned poking and pinching. Yeah, okay, he does poke me. I always thought it was because he didn't know how to be affectionate. And so that may or may, I don't know, because I'm not in your situation, but I would say more important than the poking itself would be is how you feel about that. If it hurts and you're like, dude, knock it off, like stop. If you set that boundary and he keeps doing it, that alone is a huge problem. If you set a boundary with somebody and they keep doing it, that shows that they don't respect your boundaries. And there is no relationship there with somebody that doesn't respect your boundaries, because then you're forever trying to get them to respect your boundaries, and that's impossible. Like a person's either going to respect you, they're either going to treat you with dignity and respect, or they're not. And to try to teach an adult why they should treat other people with dignity and respect, and like how to be, how to not be a jerk, is beyond anything. Like kind of a person either has that or they don't. I mean, he'd have to be really highly motivated to kind of learn that. But if he doesn't have that awareness, I think that's one of the biggest challenges with abusive people is it's their sense of entitlement and it's their selfishness. They just don't see the world outside of themselves. Like if it doesn't hurt them, then it must not hurt somebody else. And they have a very hard time understanding why it's a problem, because to them, it's not a problem. It's like if I were to keep poking you and you're like, hey, knock it off. Like that's weird. Or like that hurts. Don't do that. And I'd be like, oh, come on, lighten up. Like, can't you just take a joke? And you're like, yeah, I can take a joke, but that's not funny. Knock it off. And then if I were to continue arguing as to why it's hilarious and why it shouldn't be a problem, like do you see how that can be so draining and exhausting? Because like you shouldn't have to stand there and like what's known as jading, justify, argue, defend, and explain your boundaries. Like it's not okay with me. Don't do it. Period. End of story. But to that abusive person, like there's that lack of empathy, and there's that lack of connection where they don't get it, because to them, they don't see a problem. But the weird thing is, if you were to do something to them, if you were to constantly make jokes or like, quote unquote, tease him in a way that he wasn't okay with, he would be outraged. Odds are, right? So it's like they get it, but it's exhausting to try to get through to them. They get it on some level, but not really. Okay, let's see. Let me. Diactra, that's a great question. It says, when does narcissism become narcissism and not just dealing with a jerk? Well, to me, it's kind of potato, potato. So if you're dealing with somebody who is a selfish, difficult jerk versus a flat out narcissist, really, for our purposes, it doesn't matter at all, right? Like the damage is still going to be done. It's sort of, to me, it's sort of like figuring out if you're drinking water and there's poison in your water, does it really matter if it's bleach or strychnine or arsenic or Drano? Like, no. Poison is poison. So I'm a big fan of just steering clear completely from any of that. One of the first, I think, kind of awakenings that people tend to have in these situations is the realization that not everybody is like them. That's kind of step one, is this realization of, oh my gosh, I thought if I could just get through to this difficult person, that they would see that the kind of the error of their ways and that they would change. And so it takes a person oftentimes a while of trying to figure out, okay, how can I reword things? How can I rephrase things? How can I just get through to them that what they're doing is hurting me? And then people tend to come across the word like narcissist or sociopath, and they're like, bingo, like that's what I'm dealing with. But then it kind of spirals into, well, I'm not really sure if I'm dealing with like a narcissist or just a selfish, arrogant, egotistical, unapologetic, unremorseful jerk. And then they kind of get hung up between that. Like, well, what am I really dealing with? And then what tends to happen is, I feel like if I do my job successfully, what tends to happen is then they kind of realize, potato, potato, it really doesn't matter. A problem is a problem. What my concern is for you guys is to start to realize that other people are not like you. Everybody out there in the world has kind of their own individual moral code. And, 10% of the people out there are going to be your people. Like, you feel energized, you feel empowered, you feel nourished, you like enjoy spending time with them. It's like, that's the zone, right? Like, these are your people. And then the other 10% of people out there should probably be in prison. Really not your people. Dangerous, destructive, damaging, deadly, like not your people. And then 80% of people out there kind of fall somewhere in between. And so all we can do is take things slow enough to see things clearly enough to be able to respond accordingly if and when kind of some problem stuff does start to surface. So it's a big shift, because when people go through these types of relationships, and it's sort of like this very jarring realization of, oh my God, like there's a really dangerous people out there. The world needs to know about this. And, I can't believe this person's like walking the streets, because we tend to think that we would see an abusive person coming. And then people start having very black or white thinking, like they're either a narcissist and it's a problem, or they're somehow normal and it's not a problem. And like I was saying before, the reality is it's just shades of gray. So, yes, there is like DSM criteria for diagnosing like narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder. But again, even that's not a science. It's more of an art. And it's kind of seeing that person's behavior. It's more of like a snapshot in time of kind of what that clinician is seeing in that other person. So, and really another thing to consider, it's kind of the degree and frequency of their behavior. And it's, is it an event or is it a pattern? And then if it's a pattern, like right there, that kind of shows you're dealing more with character, especially if they're an adult and they're, if they're 40 years old and they have a pattern of lying, cheating, stealing, kind of not having a moral compass, the odds of them actually developing a moral compass as an adult is probably not going to happen. Like I would say it's less than 1% if it's even that. If anything, we all tend to become more of what we already are with time. We don't tend to radically change into something different. So, yes, so that's one of the big wake up calls, is realizing other people out there are not like us, and then fine tuning it instead of trying to see the world through the lens of, okay, there's either abusive people or there's normal people. And if you've been on or heard it in my live streams before, you've probably heard me talk about this. This was something that tripped me up for several years, is like I kept getting all of this well-intended bad advice from other people where I'm like, man, okay, I'm sensing like there's some red flags here. But then like quote unquote normal people that I knew were like, oh, well, don't be too quick to judge, or don't be too quick to, like let a good guy go. Like I did that too. Or, and so I was like, well, yeah, okay. Like for example, with Steve, he moved on from his marriage at like light speed. He met me. I told him, I said, I don't get involved with a married man or with married men. If you're really serious about wanting a divorce, like you need to move out and file papers. And he did, like that weekend. And that was a huge, like my spidey sense was tingling. And I was talking to a friend of mine about it. And she's like, she was justifying it. And she's like, well, in my marriage, I knew when it was done. I just didn't have a real reason to move out until she met her current husband and they had a good relationship. And so I was kind of like just trying to justify everything I was experiencing. But, the reality is kind of the way that they went about things was kind of problematic too. And not only that, but there were other things about Steve that I was picking up, other red flags that I was feeling that were surfacing that I was also glossing over. But it took me quite a while to really kind of tell what was a problem versus like what was quote unquote normal. And then that led me to this realization that there's not just two types of people in the world. It's not just like, narcissists or sociopaths and normal people. There's like, problematic people, normal people, and then healthy people. And, the zone is you really want to have like the healthiest people you can find in your life. And so just the realization that normal is really just a kind of a big spectrum of dysfunctional. And so to be really careful about what's considered normal, because like a person, if you're taking advice, if let's say, for example, like you go on a date with somebody and they start yelling at the waitress, or they drink more than you're comfortable with, and you get back to or they start poking you and doing that kind of stuff. When you go back to your friends and your friends are like, oh, it's totally no big deal. Like, Tom does that kind of stuff all the time to me. And, you're just too sensitive, or it's because you have issues or whatnot. You don't know. Well, actually you do know from how they react to that kind of stuff, what kind of mindset you're dealing with. So my goal, what I wish for you guys the most, would be to become so comfortable and confident in yourself that you're so in tune with your emotions that when something is right for you and when something is wrong for you. And a lot of this is trial and error and practice, okay? But when a situation is a problem for you. And even if you're in a room full of like well-intended friends and family and therapists and neighbors and people at church and you name it, even if everybody else is telling you, oh, that's not a problem, you're being too sensitive, that you can rely on yourself enough to know, if it's a problem for me, then it's a problem. And, thank you for the advice, but no, thank you. I'm going to go do my own thing now. And it takes a while to get to that place, especially after these kinds of relationships, because most people are so confused and they're so disoriented, especially if they've, abusive people, they're rarely 100% abusive 100% of the time. There's things about them that are likable and enjoyable and there's the good side. And so it can be very kind of confusing as far as like telling what kind of people to avoid if, like, when you go through something like this. Because most people, when they get out of an abusive relationship towards the tail end, like what's happened is they've been in it for so long, trying to make it work, trying to figure out who has the issue, trying to change themselves, trying to get through to their partner. They hang on until they can't hang on anymore. And then when that relationship ends, if they're not aware of, because most people aren't, if they're not aware of the problematic behaviors, if they start dating again and problematic behaviors start to surface, or if they start to surface in a different way, it's very common for a person to doubt themselves and to just think, I must just have issues with my ex. I don't want to ruin this good thing because I have issues with my ex. But when in fact, if they're not familiar with all these different types of abuse and kind of how things go down and the feelings, that's probably the biggest sign, the feelings that accompany this and how somebody reacts to or responds to you trying to set boundaries. There's so many signs there that, like, once your eyes are open to this, then it's really like you just see things in a very different way. But to other people out there who haven't gone through this, it's probably going to come across like you're paranoid, that you've been, researching the stuff too much. Like, they're just not going to get it. So, but you're not. You're seeing the world clearly for perhaps the first time ever. Okay, let me scroll down. Vegan Yogi says, yeah, I'm just happy that I'm aware now. Yes. It's huge. It's so huge. A very grumpy asked, does anybody know the difference between a narcissistic sociopath or a sociopathic narcissist? Well, I mean, generally speaking, how it was always taught to me was that kind of all sociopaths are narcissists, but not all narcissists are sociopaths. So with narcissism, with a narcissist and with the sociopath, there's still this core kind of like, problematic degree of selfishness. It's just all about them all of the time. And with the narcissist, that selfishness, they tend to, use, abuse, and neglect people. Sociopaths are more known for like exploiting others and for like just really kind of antisocial behavior. And this isn't to confuse. There's a difference between antisocial and asocial. A lot of people hear the term antisocial and they think, well, no, that person's not antisocial. They're very charming and they love to be around people. A person who's not a big fan of being around other people is asocial, not antisocial. Antisocial means more as far as like not a fan of like laws and rules and social norms. So very common for, sociopath or psychopath to have a history of like conduct disorders, behavior disorders, cruelty to animals, cruelty to others in general. So, I think as far as if you were to come across like diagnosis kind of stuff, it's a lot easier, I think, to diagnose. Well, I guess it depends on the behavior, but I think you'd find probably a lot more clinicians diagnosing a person as antisocial because there's oftentimes there's stuff that's more concrete that you can point to. Like you can point to, yes, this is when this person was in junior high and high school, like this was their list of conduct disorders. And these are these ongoing issues that they had. And, this stuff kind of tends to surface when a person's, probably around like hits puberty, like 12, 13 years old. And then it just tends to escalate. And then it gets worse as an adult. They're in and out of jail. They have charges against them. There's oftentimes history of addiction and alcoholism. There's just kind of this sense of like just recklessness. And recklessness and irresponsibility, and like a lack of remorse, and this idea that laws and rules apply to other people, but they don't apply to them. And whereas narcissism is more, their selfishness in and of itself is abusive, but they may or may not be out to actually exploit other people. So with a narcissist, they're just so lost in like this paper bag of themselves that like they just suck the air out of a room. Like it's all about them all of the time. Like you're not going to get your needs met with a narcissist. I think that's just kind of how it feels like. It's just draining because it's all about them all the time. And that kind of behavior surfaces in like a wide range of ways. But I think from what I've experienced, it's more of that. It's a jaw-dropping lack of empathy, and it's a blinding degree of selfishness where when you come across it, you're just stunned. Like, really? I can't believe that these words are coming out of your mouth, or that you would think that that would be okay to do that. Like, you've got to be freaking kidding me. I mean, it's just so outrageous that an adult especially would ever think that acting in such an outrageous way would be okay. I hope that kind of clears that up. Oh, totally. Inner fire. I love it. He says, meeting people isn't a game of chance. So there is no reason to worry about finding the 10%. Cultivating self-love and exercising healthy boundaries will take care of this. Yes. Yes. And so that was something that Maria was talking about earlier, is once you can get more in alignment with you, and you have healthy boundaries, and being in tune with your emotions, when something feels off for you, you realize, okay, there's kind of this whole emotional scale. If you're feeling like anxious and depressed, or maybe it starts off with like confusion or irritation, or some of like the earlier warning signs, like confusion, irritation, and then that grows into, anxiety, depression, agitation, profound unhappiness, like exhaustion, pain, these mental anguish, like these kinds of things are all a sign. Our emotions are always such a good kind of feedback mechanism to let us know what's going on, like how we are interacting with our environment and what needs to change. So really getting in tune with those emotions, because they're there for a reason. They have messages for you. And even though we talk about emotions oftentimes, or we're used to talking about emotions in terms of like good and bad, they're all good, even if they're painful. So all of your emotions are working in your best interest. Like they are 100% on your side, even if it feels like you've got to be kidding me. Like I have chronic anxiety and I can't sleep, and, I have all this mental anguish and my brain is going crazy and I don't trust people and all of this. Even though that feels so incredibly uncomfortable and like your brain is turning against you, it's not. It's really on your side, but it's trying to get your attention. It has messages for you. And if we can get the messages out of that emotion, and then generally something needs to be changed. If we can change whatever that message is trying to bring to our awareness, then those emotions tend to go away. So it's really magical if you can get to that place where you're more in tune with yourself and your body and these emotions as they surface. So if you can get in tune with what it feels like to truly love yourself, like Inner Fire is saying, cultivating self-love, which I think a good start to that, because that's one of those terms or phrases that feels so like fluffy or nebulous. Like, well, what does that mean? Like self-love? Like, I mean, I guess I love myself. I mean, I don't like hate myself, but I don't, like we're not taught these things. And so we don't really know. There's all these terms that are just kind of thrown around and people are often confused. If you think about self-love in terms of self-value, like if you really valued yourself, if you really valued your emotions, if you really valued your time, how would you treat yourself? How would you treat your time? You know, would you treat somebody that you loved like how you're treating yourself? Sometimes that can be a good way. Like if you had a child or a good friend, would you treat them like how you're treating yourself? And that can be very eye-opening and disconcerting all at the same time. But it's, again, it's those feelings of sadness and or realization of, oh my gosh, no, I would not treat a child like this. If I really had somebody in my life that I truly cared about, I would eat differently. I would wear different clothes. I would, you know, like you would just maybe do things a little bit differently. Like you would take better care of yourself is what I'm saying. Those emotions of like sadness or regret or all of those, again, those are all working, they're trying to keep you safe. All of your emotions are trying to keep you safe. They're working in your best interest. So to try to make peace with all of this stuff as it surfaces is important and kind of healing in and of itself. Okay, let's see. And Maria had mentioned earlier about, and I meant to read that, but then I moved the scroll thing and I lost it. About making that shift from needing to diagnose other people. Yes, absolutely. I think that's such a huge step in all of this is pain. I think often really, really the purpose of pain is to bring something to our attention because we all kind of go through life, you know, our body, our physical body seeks homeostasis. Our body temperature seeks to be at the same level. And but we also have this like emotional homeostasis where we have this kind of baseline for what's comfortable. And so we kind of go through life coasting along based on what's comfortable. And then there's some sort of basically like painful experience that happens that's like, oh no, that we're thrown out of our comfort zone. And for a lot of people, and like we probably wouldn't have left that comfort zone any other way. These types of, narcissistically abusive relationship is very much that way, very much that way. And it brings so much to a person's attention and awareness that they probably would never have encountered any other way. I mean, it's just like this crash course into personal growth that is tremendous and incredibly, I mean, it's just like none of us wanted to be here. But at the end of the day, all of these lessons that you can gain from this are absolutely invaluable. And it's powerful stuff, what can result from this. But one of the things is, so a person's in this emotionally or psychologically abusive relationship, they come across the word narcissist or sociopath. It's this huge aha moment. And then in an effort, I think this is a very human thing, in this effort to make sense of what caused us pain, we start researching obsessively about it. It makes sense, right? Like, because you're trying to figure out, I need to know with as much detail as I possibly can what caused me pain so I can avoid it next time. And it can take a person quite a while. I mean, it took me, I had to go through this, and I'd been through these types of relationships several times with certain friends. I dated a guy when I was, in high school. And then I had Jack, and then I had Steve, but this was like 20 years later. and I'd had problematic people at work. I mean, I'd had problematic people kind of surface every now and again in my life, but I didn't connect the dots. Like, I just thought it was them, you know, I didn't see, and even though, and I mentioned this before, like, it's weird because I really wanted to know. I was so interested in, and I still am, like, so interested in self-help and like all this kind of stuff. But I just, the information, I don't know, it didn't sink in. Like, I didn't get it. Like, I didn't get it. And so it didn't, I really thought, you know, with Jack, I thought, okay, I got tangled up with the sociopath and it was a fluke thing and it'll never happen again. And so it wasn't really on my radar of something to really watch out for. So I just thought it was him. It was, a fluke thing. Well, and then a couple years later, I got tangled up with another one. And that was when I realized, okay, there's something more going on here because now it's a pattern. So what am I missing? And my situations were unique in the fact that they were both very much like Prince Charming, but I mean, just again, like the love, like the lack of remorse, the just the outrageousness of both of the situations were just jaw dropping and way outside the realm of like a normal relationship or a normal bad breakup. And so, I began really researching into like narcissism and sociopathy and psychopathy. And then, I mean, it took me several years. Then I kind of realized, and it wasn't until I started my YouTube channel, honestly, that I began getting feedback from people about kind of boundaries and people talking about codependency. And I remember, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, I don't think that that's me. So I feel like I just, and part of this is true. Like, I feel like I just got manipulated and that was that. Like, I didn't feel like I had any issues with codependency. You know, I'm totally fine being single. I've been single for long periods in my life. And I don't feel like I need to be in a relationship. I don't look for somebody else to complete me. I don't know. Like, I had some deal breakers for some, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't see how that described me at all. And then the more I began getting into it, and it was so weird. I actually did a podcast today about people pleasing and saying no. And even back then, it's just, I think of what it is it's difficult. We're so close to ourselves, right? It's difficult for us to see our own issues. It's so much easier to see issues in other people. And so that whole concept that it's so difficult for us to see things within ourselves, to me, is absolutely fascinating. And because then it kind of made me wonder, like, well, what else is going on with me that I'm totally not aware of? So anyways, but I was doing this podcast about people pleasing. And I remember I did, I don't know if you guys saw it, I did a video with Richard Grannon. I don't know, a year or two ago. And we were talking about like Buddhism and boundaries and these kinds of things. And he had said something to me in one of the videos that we did about being kind of go with the flow and why that's a problem. And because a lot of my beliefs are very Buddhist in nature and just kind of, and I've always been kind of a very go with the flow kind of person. And so he had basically brought up like, yeah, well, that's a problem. And it wasn't until that video where I'm like, oh my God, like, you're absolutely right. Like, that is a problem. And so then, and I was talking to one of the admins in my group. Like, I read the book Codependent No More. I've read that book twice. I seriously have gotten nothing out of that book. Like, I don't get it. So, which makes me kind of wonder, like, I want to go back and reread it again for a third time to see if maybe now I would understand, like, it would resonate more. It's just weird. But I think it was how stuff was phrased. And so I think it's like that for a lot of people, because especially with a lot of the personality traits that we all tend to have, where like, there's nothing wrong with me. Like, I am very kind and compassionate and loving, and I'm just a good person. So no, there's nothing wrong with me. That person lied and cheated and stole, and they were incredibly exploitative, and there was verbal abuse. Like, I didn't do any of that. So there's nothing for me to change. Like what, like it just didn't click. And then it took me a while to realize all of those traits, those being kind, compassionate, caring, being go with the flow, that's all good to an extent. And so like learning to value your time, learning to value your emotions, learning to honor them too, was kind of the big pieces that I was missing. And it wasn't until I really grasped that, because even after Steve, there was a handful of other like little micro relationships that would last for like less than a few months, where problem stuff would start to surface. And then thankfully they would end for what, either they broke up with me or I broke up with them. But thank God, because this pattern was still kind of active within me, but I didn't realize that it was a pattern, to the extent that it was. And I didn't realize all of the kind of the cycles that I needed to break. Like, it took me realizing, oh, that love bombing it feels ideal. It seems ideal. We're taught that it's ideal. That love bombing is actually incredibly problematic. That was a big piece for me. Slowing things down was a big piece for me. Not taking people for face value was a big piece for me. So all of these things that I thought, no, I'm just a kind, good person, I was in many ways kind of very naive and didn't realize that I was. And I had a lot of things to just learn. And this stuff's not taught, again. So, but I think that's a lot of people. So that's what I try to do. My second book, which will be out in December, because I try to see this stuff, like I was talking about before, I try to see this stuff through many different lenses. Like, how would I have perceived this information had I been like a week out of this or a month out, or how do I perceive it now? How can I frame it in a certain way that it would get through to somebody? Because again, it's weird to me that I was actively out there searching for this stuff, but it still wasn't sinking in. So my whole goal with these two books is to really kind of spell it out in a way that shines as much light as possible kind of on this topic, so that you guys, it can shave years off of your learning curve. Because what happens is people will tend to get like one or two pieces of this puzzle. They'll be like, okay, I can see love bombing for what it is now. Got that piece down, but then there's still other pieces that are missing. And so then they have to kind of go through this pattern a few more times. And then they realize, okay, that's what I was missing. And then they put that piece in. But that's it's a really hard, painful way to learn. Okay, let's see. Let me scroll up here. Interesting. Awake Kate. Hi. Awake Kate says, can you discuss going slow versus settling for crumbs? That's interesting that you're kind of comparing these two. Okay, so to me, they're totally different. Like, going slow. So, okay. And I think I'm understanding the connection that you're making, but if I'm not, correct me and then I'll address that. Okay. To me, going slow is taking your time to get to know somebody else. So if you've met somebody through, hold on, I gotta readjust here. If you've met somebody, let's say you've met somebody online, right? Going slow would be maybe you text them a few times, they're texting you, and then you finally move to a phone call. And then you see if you have chemistry that way. And then you decide to meet in person. And then you meet for coffee, just coffee, 45-minute kind of thing to see if there's chemistry. And then there is chemistry. And then you move to, texting each other, setting up a second date. And then second date is maybe, dinner someplace, and maybe dinner and a movie. Then you go dinner and a movie. Maybe then you have like a kiss at the end of the night, and then that's it. And then there's more texting, there's more phone calls. Then the third date is kind of, again, still out in public, maybe a more passionate kiss at the end of the night. Fourth date, still out in public. So kind of nobody's meeting each other's kids until at least 6 or 8 months in. There's no talk about love or, moving in together. There's no action of like moving in together. Really kind of really waiting, I would say at least 30 days or so before having sex with somebody. So you can really, you have a chance. So you're valuing your time, and you're valuing your emotions. You're kind of seeing them in a wide variety of situations. You're seeing, is this person the kind of person that I actually want to invest my time and my emotions into? And compared to, so that to me, that would be kind of going slow versus going fast, which is a lot of love bombing from one person, constant texts, hey, how are you? What are you doing? A good morning text, a good night text, a middle of the night text, a text during lunch. And it's really easy to get caught up in that. But like lots and lots of texting, you're responding immediately. They're really setting the pace. The texts start to become like really sexy and flirty. And, people are sending like nude pictures of each other. People are talking about marriage. People are talking about moving in together. What a perfect person this is. And things are moving really, really fast. They haven't even met yet. And then the first date, they're, either making out or they're having sex. Maybe the first date or the second date's actually at somebody's house and they're a total stranger. So stuff that's like moving way too fast, that you don't know this person. So that to me would be like putting trust in a person that you don't know. But the danger of that with that love bombing and all of that constant communication is it feels like you do know them. And that's why emotional manipulators do that. So it's really important to set the pace. So if a person's, let's say, for example, if they're texting you and you don't mind, like it's not really love bombing, but they're just kind of chatty, to value your time and to be like, okay, I'll get back to them. Like if you're driving, right? Like I'll get back to them when I get to work. So you're not in this constant like reaction mode, and where you're texting them back at a red light and you're kind of contributing to this whirlwind. Like you realize things can go very, very quickly. There can be this intense amount of chemistry over text message, but then in real life, there might not be that chemistry. And then things get really, really awkward. And generally somebody has their feelings hurt or somebody gets upset and they feel led on. So, and a lot of people are on online dating because they like the attention. They're married and maybe they want to cheat, or they're married and they just want to flirt, or they're in a relationship and they like the attention or they want to flirt, or maybe they're scammers, or maybe they're just not sincere. Like they're just bored and they're looking for a cheap thrills as a way to pass time at work. You know what I mean? So realizing that there's all these kind of different scenarios possible. And so not letting a total stranger suck up your time, because you won't know if their intentions are sincere until like you meet, you realize that you have chemistry, and then moving slow. So to me, that's kind of what moving slow and what moving fast looks like. So you control the pace. And then settling for crumbs. So crumbs would be a person texts you like once every 3 days, or they seem to run really hot and cold. where you kind of get the vibe like they're not just taking things slow, like they don't really seem interested, because you can take things slow and still text the person every single day. Like, hey, how's it going? I'm thinking about you. And maybe during that whole kind of taking it slow, and this is the big thing for me, like meet in person. After you know that for real, there's that chemistry, then texting normally will kind of pick up the pace. They're interested, you're interested, you're texting more and more. Texts are still appropriate. Nobody's sending nudes, nobody's sexting, none of that. Like, hey, it was really great to see you. You're having a good conversation. You feel like you're cultivating something deeper, something lasting, like a friendship. But knowing that you're attracted to that other person, right? You're talking about your day, you're talking about TV shows, you're talking about what you want to do for your next date. You're making plans. That's the difference. Or one of the differences is you're making those future plans of, hey, you're small talk, kind of, you're a little flirty, but nothing like, nothing that you'd be embarrassed if somebody got your phone, right? And they're making a plan. Like generally, most of the time when a guy is interested, they will make plans. They're going to say, hey, would you like to go out this weekend? Can't wait to see you again. Would you like to go out for lunch? They're going to be kind of instigating things and planning things. So if a person just seems kind of like lukewarm and they're not, especially if they're not making any plans to see you again, to me, that's crumbs. And that's sort of like, okay, I'm feeling like I'm plan B or C or D. And a lot of people that are dating online tend to be dating multiple people, or they're going on dates with multiple people. And so then that's a whole nother kind of interesting issue that tends to come up with like online stuff, is then having those conversations of, okay, now we're on date number 3 and hey, I'm really interested in you. And, I don't know, maybe this is kind of awkward, but I feel like a conversation we need to have, are you seeing anybody else? Or do you have a desire to, like, I'd really like for us to just see each other. How do you feel about that? Seeing what they say, kind of seeing where their intentions are. And this is why it's so important to go slow and and it's easier said than done. I totally get it, but to not get so emotionally invested up front, because it takes time for a person's character to surface and for their intentions to surface and kind of all of that stuff to surface. So, oh, hello. Okay. Doug. Hi. Thank you for the Livestream donation. Doug says, light, love, and hugs for all. We can heal. Namaste and have a wonderful week. Thank you for all you do, Dana. Oh, Doug, thank you. You are so welcome. And I don't know if you were here earlier, but I was just letting people know, I just figured out how to do a free promo thing through Amazon. So my book, if you haven't already grabbed it, it's going to be free tomorrow for the next 3 days. So the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 4th of November, that my book, the Start Here book, is going to be free on Amazon. And I'll put a link down below. So if you want to grab a copy, definitely grab one. So I hope all is well with you. And thank you for your support and for your beautiful spirit, as always. Missouri Cowboy says, thank you for the days to read your book for free. I'm afraid of Kindle, and that's okay. I can wait for the real book. Okay, good deal. I am working on it. And thank you for the live stream donation. Yes. So this has been like like I was talking about earlier, it's so weird. It's so weird to ride all these different learning curves with this stuff. And I've been hesitant to put that book out in paperback because that feels so final. I don't know. I'm going to wait. I'm hoping with the free giveaway that I'll get enough feedback from people, either through reviews or through feedback on Facebook or, in the live stream or wherever, that I can kind of gauge if I need to address it, if there's like any glaring, issues in that book that I need to kind of iron out. Lucy was one of my kind of my quote unquote test readers for my second book. And oh my goodness, like gave like it like brings tears to my eyes. She spent so much time and energy and effort reading and giving feedback, and sent me close to 60 pages of notes on that book of things that just in her feedback. It was phenomenal. So, and there were kind of three major areas in there that I really did tweak because I hadn't thought about it. I mean, she saw it through her perspective, and she was, you know, I'm so glad like that she mentioned that stuff, because that's what scares me, is thinking about this material in a way that I hadn't thought about it before, and then having that message not land in the way that I intended it to land. So I didn't have, like, I had my mom test read book number 1, but I don't think, like, I think she was reading it more for like spelling and grammar. So I don't know. And then I wasn't comfortable really having anybody else really read book 1, because I don't know. I'm weird about book 1. Like I think it was just, I put so much flippin' energy into that book that it was hard. It was hard for me to have other people read it. So I don't know, but yes, hopefully, anyways, the point being, once I get some feedback and I can see if I need to change anything or if it's good or like what goes on, then I will get it going in paperback. And side note too, I've been really learning about like Audible books and how to record an Audible book. So I was super intimidated by that process, but I was playing around with Audacity and different sound equipment stuff today. And I really do think that I'll be able to figure it out. So that's super exciting, because I had contacted a studio to see if like a professional could help me with technology and with all of this. And it was going to be like super expensive. So I was really bummed about that, but I think I can figure it out. So I don't know. We'll see. And Doug too, I would be more than happy to like mail you a paperback book when it comes out. So if you want to message me on, maybe through YouTube would be the best way. If no pressure, if you're interested in that, if you want, like, let me know if you're comfortable with me actually physically mailing you a book. Please leave me your name and your address and stuff, and I will make sure to get one out to you. And yeah, okay. So here's another thing. I see there's all these like little things to like think about, and decisions. All the little decisions and all of this is, oh my God. So with books, I forget what they're called. There's a name for them. Book plates. That's what they're called. Book plates. A person can order, and this is such a genius idea. So like a person can, you can write a message in a book, right? And like sign your name or whatever, which kind of stressed me out. Cause I'm like, man, what if I misspell something? Like, man, I do this with greeting cards. Like whenever I buy a greeting, like a birthday card or something for somebody, I normally buy 2 or 3 because it never fails. Like my brain works faster than my hand. And so then my handwriting is a hot mess, or I'm like misspelling words, and I have to like slow down and like methodically write out a card. It's torture. So then I was having all this anxiety of like, well, what if like certain people were wanting like signed copies, and then I'm going to be going, it's one thing for like a birthday card, which is like a couple bucks, but if I just visualize this whole, this mountain of books of like hot mess handwriting and like misspelled words and like scratching stuff out. And I'm like, oh no, that's not going to be good. And so then I thought, okay, so I was asking my writers group, I'm like, well, what do you guys do? I mean, like, this is not a problem I'm having right now, but me and my anxiety would like to address this before it becomes a problem. And they were saying that they use these things called book plates, which are like giant stickers So, and you can get them designed with different designs and whatnot. And then you can write your message on that. And so that way, if you mess up, you're messing up on a sticker, but then you peel it off and you place it inside the book. So I was like, I don't know how people would feel about that. I don't know how I feel about that. Like from like a writer's perspective, I love it. But if I were to actually get a book with a message in that, like, I don't know. I don't know if I'd like that. So I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Does it matter? Is it weird? Okay. Let's see. Star Child says, what's the purpose of mirroring? So mirroring is, we all do it. Okay. It's a very normal part of like how people bond. So let's say, for example, if you and I are in a room together, it's to establish rapport is really what it is. So let's say if you were when I was a nurse, okay, and I oftentimes worked with people that had undergone trauma or brain injuries, or I've worked with a wide range of people that mirroring was a very important thing, and developing rapport was a very important thing, and getting them so that they could trust you was a very important thing, because they were scared, they were confused, they didn't know who I was, they didn't know who they were. Like there was a lot of other dynamics at play. And so for example, let's say if you were when I was a nurse, let's say if you were one of my patients, okay, and I was using this mirroring technique to try to develop rapport. So I would be paying attention to like the words that you're using to describe what happened to you. And I would be changing the language that I use to match your language. So for example, just from a kind of a nursing perspective, if you were to use the words, let me think of an example. If you were to say something like, I really need to go to the bathroom, I really need to go pee, okay, I would probably talk about going to the bathroom using that kind of language. But let's say if you were a doctor, or that's probably a good example. Let's say a doctor were to get in a car accident, right? And he's in the hospital. He might not use the terminology, I need to go pee. He might say something like, I need to go urinate, or some kind of more like maybe a little bit more, just kind of, I'd step it up a notch, right? So I would match that language. So then because it would seem condescending if I were to talk to somebody who was using the word, I need to go urinate. If I were to say, oh, well, if you need to go pee, it's in there. Like they might be offended by that. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's kind of matching your language to that's kind of like a TMI kind of example there, but like matching your language to the person that you're talking to. So in terms of, like when I worked at the domestic violence shelter, if somebody, for example, called their husband, if they weren't comfortable using the word abuser, if they were to kept referring to him as, oh, he would just get really angry, he'd get really upset, I would mirror those words back to them. So, okay, if I'm understanding you correctly, he'd get very angry, he'd get very upset, and I might kind of veer off into, would you consider this like verbal abuse? And are you familiar with verbal abuse? And see if how those words landed. And if they landed, if a person was curious or what have you, then we would talk a little bit more about that, kind of realizing like you're treading on ice. But if they were like, no, I wouldn't say he was abusive, then I would kind of back up a little bit and like let them take the lead with the words that they were using. Right. And then maybe try to approach that conversation in like a different way at a different time. So that's more of like a positive way that people do mirroring. Car salesmen are notorious for like manipulative, like icky, slimy mirroring. So they're taught this like sales kinds of stuff, right? So like if a person is if you've got a really big client, they teach this in real estate too. Like if you've got a really big client and they're wearing jeans and a t-shirt, then you need to be wearing jeans and a t-shirt. If they cross their legs a certain way, then you cross your legs a certain way. If they, if they're real kind of laid back and they're cussing, then it might help you to establish that rapport by being really laid back and cussing. Kind of you're matching what they're doing. So a good example of this is if you watch the show Mind Hunters, and when they're doing these, they're meeting with these different serial killers, and they're kind of trying to establish this rapport with them. They're using the language, they're dehumanizing the victims, and they're using the language of kind of what they would imagine these serial killers would use. So it's very crude, very crass, very dehumanizing, very degrading kind of language. And so then the serial killer kind of gets this feeling of, oh, he gets me. And then they're more inclined to open up. So with emotional manipulators, especially the highly skilled ones, what they do is they'll reflect back to you, they'll mirror back to you a lot of like your wants and needs and hopes and dreams and desires. So if you're talking about, I've always wanted to go to like this yoga festival in Thailand, and I've always wanted to, to homeschool my children and to be married and all of that. They often will reflect that back to you. Oh man, I would love to go to that yoga festival in Thailand, and how amazing. And oh, I'm so into, whatever, like Eckhart Tolle and all of I'm so into everything that you're into, basically is what it is. Another example of this is if you guys remember in that movie Beetlejuice, when Michael Keaton, Beetlejuice, is trying to establish rapport with the married couple. There was Gina Davis, and I forget who played her husband. And he kept trying to convince them to, I don't even know what he was wanting them to do, but he kept trying to convince them to help him out somehow. And they were really uncertain. And then at one point he's like, oh, come on, you can trust me. We even dress alike. And he was dressed like he changed the way that he looked. So he dressed like the husband. And I think it's kind of this whole psychological principle of we tend to like people that are like us. So it makes sense, right? Like we tend to have this kind of unspoken rapport with other people that like the same music as us, that like that are the same religion as us, that maybe come from the same city or state as us, that drive a similar car as us, that you see this with Harley Davidson riders, right? Like there's just this unspoken bond. Like if you own a Harley, then you're in. Like they'll nod at you, they'll wave at you on the highway, like you're one of them. Same thing with Jeep owners. It's just kind of this, you're not just the Jeep owner or a Harley owner, you're indoctrinated into like this, you're part of that culture. And so predators really rely on this and they exploit this. So a common way that predators exploit something like this is, you can see this a lot on like different religious dating sites. So like, anywhere really, but I think one of the places that concerns me the most are these religious dating sites. Like there's like Jewish singles or like Catholic singles or these kinds of sites where people really have dropped their guard because there is this implied assumption that we all share the same morals and values, right? I'm Catholic, you're Catholic. I'm Jewish, you're Jewish. And so you're really inferring a lot about somebody else because you think, well, we have the same faith, therefore they must believe the same things, therefore they must have the same moral code that I do. And predators are relying on that. So they can really tell a person so much from their profile, like, oh, here's this woman, they can sell that whole fantasy. Oh, I just really want to be there for you. I want to raise your children. I've never been able to have children of my own. I've always wanted to be a father or a mother or what have you, and tell them everything that they want to hear. Just love bomb them to pieces. And of course, if a person doesn't realize that that's a red flag, they're like, man, I lucked out. I've won the relationship lottery. And so they're just eating it up And this person's just, they know they've got a live one on the line and they're reeling them in. And then this is how, people lose their life savings. This is how a lot of people get roped into like, human trafficking, because they think, because nobody gives away their life savings to a stranger. Nobody gets in the car with a stranger, right? People give away their life savings to somebody that they feel that they have a deep relationship with. And these predators are able, or they go and they meet this person in another state because they feel like this could really be the one. And then they're never heard from them again. So it's imperative to always have healthy boundaries all the time, because and to go with your gut instincts on stuff, and just err on the side of caution, even if your gut instincts aren't really going off. Like even if, like, let other people know where you are, and just go slow with stuff like that. So that was kind of a long explanation. I hope that helped. Okay, let me see. Let me scroll down. Very Grumpy says, my narcissist always told me my role as a Christian wife, but he never did his own as a husband. Yes. And it's very, very common. It's because it would be inconvenient, right? So if you were to actually be like, oh, I guess that means that I'd have to like stop lying and cheating and stealing and, doing all these terrible things. It's amazing how much confusion, manipulation can cause, and how easy it is for any of us to get sucked into it. And when you're in it, you're so confused and so knocked off balance. And there's always these little half truths, right? Like, oh, it's important that you forgive, and you got to kind of, love the sinner and hate the sin. And kind of all of these things kind of make sense on a surface level. But then they're just so twisted to where, they're used against a person to keep them in their relationship or to make them feel guilty or what have you. And it's not until a person starts getting out of that relationship that they realize, oh, this was all just a huge manipulation. And then it's quite the process for them to start kind of peeling back the layers and to start seeing things clearly and realize this person was twisting scripture, right and left to make themselves, to justify what they were doing, and then to make me feel bad for not continuing to allow it. There's a fantastic website that I came across that Lucy actually mentioned the other day. It is called, I want to say Luke 17:3. So Luke 173 ministries.org. And I believe it's run by a Catholic nun. And her primary focus is on kind of untangling scripture and bringing a lot of clarity to that for people that are going through a lot of spiritual abuse, so that the Bible isn't a tool that's used for manipulation and abuse. I was very impressed with her website. Like, she really knows her stuff, and just spot on, just spot on. So that might be a resource you want to check out. Stan Firm says, yeah, Mindhunter is excellent. I just wish a show could be produced about narcissists that aren't criminal. I agree completely. And pointing out what is, like, what's going on and why it's a problem. The why is the biggest thing, because I think to paint the picture of, to just showcase something but not explain why, there's so much there that's lost when the why isn't explained. There's a lot of movies out there that do showcase really problematic, emotional, verbal, psychological abuse, but it's not framed in oftentimes it's not framed in a way that it's a problem. And if anything, it's the opposite. It's shown from a more of a perspective of that this is somehow ideal. Like 50 Shades of Grey would be an example. I did a video on that a while back. about what I find problematic about 50 Shades of Grey. The movie How Stella Got Her Groove Back, which was ironically one of my favorite movies back in the day. And I thought it was like this amazing love story, but then kind of fast forward, you find out the truth about what was really going on in her life. If you look up like her interviews with Oprah after the fact, it, you know, turns out this guy, he basically had her pegged from day one when she was on vacation, and you know, kind of attached his wagon to her train, and you know, to get citizenship, and then to basically soak her for all he could. And it was just it's ridiculous. But it's interesting because that movie used to be my favorite movie for like a love story, but now it's one of my favorite movies because it shows a love bombing story. And if you go back and you watch that movie through this kind of fresh set of eyes of, this is how manipulation goes down. Like, this is how love bombing goes down. This is what predatory behavior looks like. Like, this is all of the charm that he used. And if you can, and you can see it, like you can see all of her confusion. You can see her family's confusion, their suspicion, kind of red flags going off, how he really began working overtime to just charm them all, and really came across like Prince Charming, you know, this amazing guy that kind of quote unquote helped her get her groove back. Right. And it's not until after the movie, like several years after the movie, that the reality came out about what was going on. But it's interesting when you do come across the mirroring and this kind of like predatory type behavior. Hold on a second. I was gonna reading the chat and I got distracted here. Oh, I was going to, the kind of, these people are oftentimes very much social chameleons, and it's very disorienting. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. When you were with me, you were all about like Buddhism and yoga and being a vegetarian and like, you know, not watching a lot of TV and just kind of like living this chill life. And then the next person, now all of a sudden, like you're super Christian, and you know, now you want this family and you want to live in the city, and like it's total like a 180. Like, wait, what? Like, how does a person change that much? And that was one of the hardest things for me to get over with Jack, is I'm like, man, we had so much in common. I can't believe like that kind of connection doesn't come across. You don't come across that every day. And I couldn't believe that he was so willing to just get rid, like to toss that away. And it took me years to realize that, oh no, it was all scripted. Like there wasn't really a connection. He was just pretending to be everything that I needed him to be or wanted him to be. And that he would just morph into whatever the next person needed or wanted him to be. Like there was nothing there. He just he's a social chameleon because he's an emotional and financial con artist. And that's what they do. That's true. Phil says, forget Harleys. All bikers get along for the most part. We all got each other's back. Yeah, that's a very valid point. It is. It's a biker community. You know, it's a mindset. It's cool. Like I see bikers. I'm not a motorcycle person, but like I see bikers on the road, and it's cool. Like how, you know, they acknowledge each other, and it is, you know, because I guess it's kind of anything that creates kind of this us versus them, right? It's kind of bikers versus cars, or it's freedom versus the grind. And so, yeah. So people were talking about astrology. I will tell you though, one of the big things about astrology is It's very common. So we were talking about earlier how people tend, when they start kind of waking up to this stuff, and they start, at first they're like, oh my goodness, not everybody's like me. And it's weird because we do kind of know that, but not to like the reality of like what, to the extent that what that really means. Like we all kind of know, yeah, there's problematic people out there. We just all thought we'd be able to see them coming, like the Charles Mansons of the world, right? Like we kind of thought, and I think a lot of us thought, you know what, if I leave them alone, they'll leave me alone. If I stay in, the right parts of town, and if I kind of watch my back and I keep my keys in my hand, and, I don't hang out with, kind of thugs and goons, I'm not going to have problems in my life if I hang out with, you know, like decent people. Or even if we thought, okay, if we did come across dangerous people like gang members or thugs or goons or whatever, that if I'm nice to them, then they'll be nice to me. We just kind of thought, the thing is, we all thought that there are rules for evil, and there's not. And I've seen this time and time again. People are like, oh, well, if you talk about God, they don't like that. They don't like that. Or that, I'm trying to think, what are some other rules? Oh, that they would never hurt their own children. Or, well, surely they wouldn't hurt me, right? I mean, I'm pregnant with their child. Or, well, he would never hurt his own mother. I mean, she's bailed him out of jail 30 times and has always been there for him. So he'd never hurt her. Or, she'd never hurt her pet. I mean, she really loves that dog. She would never hurt them. That we somehow think that there's rules. Oh, well, of course, like they'd abide by the restraining order, right? Like that'll keep me safe. I have a restraining order. Or they would never, come looking for me at work, or you know what I mean? Like I'm somehow safe during the day. It's only at night that they're going to show up. But the reality, and this is our brain trying to make sense of things and we're so driven to kind of have stability in our life and to have a routine and to have structure is really what it is. And so our brain kind of, again, it's still kind of like imposing our own morality and our own moral code onto things. But the reality is evil doesn't have rules. Like they will hurt their own children. They can come after you during daylight. They don't care about God. They often will be, they'll happily go to church with you. They don't fear holy water. Do you know what I mean? Like the evil has its own code, and that code is chaos. There is, it's free range. And so it's really important for us to see that we can't box it in and be like, okay, well, it's only Scorpios or fire signs or what have you that are problematic, or it's only men that are problematic, or it's only, attorneys or police officers or, gang members or people with tattoos or motorcyclists or people that date online or what have you that are problematic. Like it's problematic behavior is the problem. And there are no rules for that. It's any gender, any age, any sexual orientation, any nationality, any religion, anything. It can be a neighbor, a person that you volunteer with, somebody at your church, a quote unquote friend, a family member, a spouse, you name it. And we oftentimes too, on the kind of the reverse of that, tend to think, well, to fight this evil, that, love conquers all, and that we'll just beat it with goodness. So I see this kind of mentality with the idea of, well, in order to protect my child, I'll just make sure that they know that they're very loved, that a loving home somehow kind of inoculates somebody against getting tangled up with a predator. It's a good start. I mean, it's a good goal to have, but the reality is it's knowledge of this stuff and then it's application of this knowledge. So just sort of like giving a child a loving home we still talk to children about talking to strangers. You don't take candy from strangers. You rehearse scenarios with them, right? So like, what would you do if somebody came up and offered you candy? Or what would you do if somebody came over to you and said, hey, I've got a puppy in the van. Do you want to go see it? Right? We try to give children these scenarios. And even then, like, that's good. But I think it's more important to be talking about, how do these situations make a person feel? If somebody comes up to you, and because oftentimes, especially with children, well, even with adults, like, it's generally not a stranger. That's the thing, is it's not a stranger that approaches you. Oftentimes when children do get molested or abducted, it's generally by somebody that they know. When an adult gets, raped or abducted or abused, it's generally by somebody that they know. And this stranger danger, again, it's kind of this idea of like, well, evil only happens if it's a stranger, like some sort of outsider. And no, it's oftentimes somebody that we already know. So it's getting kids and adults to understand our emotions. It's that feeling of uneasiness. It's that feeling of confusion, of, how does fear feel? You feel like, ooh, I don't know if I really want to go with that person, or something feels off. I feel uncomfortable. I feel unsafe. I have goosebumps on the back of my neck. I'm just not comfortable doing that. And realizing that it's okay. It's okay to say no. And it's okay to run away. I think so many of us are also taught that we need to be polite, especially women. Like, we don't want to do things that might come across as rude. And so oftentimes we might find ourselves in really bad situations because we don't want to be rude. I remember when I was 17? 17. Now, mind you, this is back in the day, before there were cell phones, before there was internet, before there was GPS in your car, any of that. And I went on a road trip with a friend of mine from Colorado to Houston. And my mom sat us down because I grew up in Houston, but my friend had lived in this small town her whole life. And my mom was like, I'm so concerned that you're traveling with her because she's so just naive. And frankly, I was too. It was a good thing that my mom went through this stuff with both of us, because I would have done this stuff too. And she had these different scenarios. What do you do if you're in this hotel room and somebody starts banging on the door and they say that they need to come in and use your phone because there's been a terrible accident? And my friend was like, oh my God, I would open the door. And my mom was like, no, you don't. You tell them to go to the front office. Like, you don't open your, like, don't let somebody else's emergency potentially put you in danger. Or what was another scenario? I vividly remember that one, because I would have totally opened the door. I don't know, things like that. And we do that. Like, we think that it's going to go down in a certain way. Like, I guess stranger's going to offer a child candy well, okay, but what if they offer them a puppy instead? Or what if they offer them, money? Or what if they just say something like, oh, I really want to take your picture? Or, do you see what I'm saying? Like, so that's why it's so important to not teach the scenario so much, but it's more of like the feeling of that. But scenarios are still good. It's still good to practice this stuff, but it's more the feelings behind it. So, yes, totally. Missouri Cowboy says yes. It's just like a pedophile grooms their target, the narcissist grooms their target. Absolutely. And this is one of the reasons too why children, that are being molested, it's the same feelings that adults have when they're going through something like this. They're like, did I cause it? What did I do? I feel to blame for this. At first I felt really special and unique and important. And then all of a sudden, like, that started turning dark. And now, like, I'm not comfortable with what's going on. And that's how predators work with children, right? It tends to be like, some adult takes this unusual and extraordinary interest in the child. And at first it's the love bombing. It's the child version of the adult love bombing. You know, how I think you could really be a great athlete. I'm just going to work with you and we're going to go shoot hoops every single day and you'll get there. You've really got it, kid. And they're building them up and they're grooming them. And then it's all of these subtle little boundary pushes. And then it's the threats. Like, don't tell anybody else. This is, you made me do this, or, your parents are really going to be upset, or this never happened. Just like flat out gaslighting. It's the same thing with adults. Yeah, Shannon says the avid Charles Manson stuff is exactly what I was taught. Yeah. A lot of us think that we can spot the Charles Mansons of the world, but the problem is that people that are really dangerous are more of like the Bill Cosbys of the world or the Scott Petersons of the world. And, you just like nobody sees those guys coming. So Phil, to answer your question, Phil says, Dana, can you please explain a covert narcissist? Police called me an idiot for using the term covert narcissist. I learned the term from you. Well, yes, I can explain it. And that was a real jerk face thing for them to call you an idiot for. And they shouldn't be calling you an idiot anyhow, but especially for that. Covert narcissism tends to be more of that. I would say maybe even like, you could even call it kind of like that covert sociopathy, even like it's anything that's overt is very outright. So you can remember it that way, like O for overt, O for outright. So like overt abuse tends to be very physical abuse or very like, name calling, yelling, threats, that kind of stuff would be like overt abuse. Covert is stuff that tends to be more hidden or clandestine. And so covert abusers tend to come across as a really great person to everybody else except to their targets. And I think it's difficult enough for people to spot and acknowledge even overt abuse. And it's even harder for covert abuse. There's just so much more awareness that needs to happen with all of this stuff. Like I said, a lot of this stuff, like 50 Shades of Grey, to me, that's pretty overt. Like that's a problem. I mean, there's flat out stalking, there's boundary violations, there's, just all kinds of stuff in that movie, but it's seen as romantic. And I'm trying to think of some other films. Well, there was the whole Daddy of Five scandal. I don't know if you guys are following that on YouTube at all, where this awful father and stepmother, just freaking awful people, and were recording their children. And they had targeted the youngest, who was this little kid. He looked like the little boy from Jerry Maguire, like just this cute little kid. And he was the target of all of their abuse. I think there was 3 or 4 other kids and him and the parents, and they all targeted this little boy. And it was like, to me, it was like, and to most people, I think it was very like overtly psychologically abusive, physically abusive, verbally abusive. They would they filmed it all, and they would belittle, they would push, they would shove, they would, just be absolutely awful to this kid is screaming, he's crying, he's begging them to stop, and like nobody would stop. They all were like, oh, you need to lighten up, you need to learn how to take a joke. They're just just no respect for this kid's boundaries. And here they are putting these videos up, and hundreds of thousands of people are watching them, and everybody thinks it's hilarious. It's one of the most disgusting displays of abusive behavior I've ever seen. And they ended up going to court, and, the internet was very divided on this. Like, a lot of people were like, oh, come on, it's not that bad. They're just playing pranks. And a lot of people didn't see it as abusive, but those that did see it are like, you've got to be freaking kidding me. Like, somebody get that kid out of that house, because, he's obviously traumatized. I mean, it was so obvious. Like, it's just ridiculous. So that's kind of, I guess, the difference. I hope I answered your question. Overt is obvious, covert is more hidden. And it's a lot harder to prove to other people. And it's a lot harder to see, because it can be so hidden. Lynette asks, has Asperger's ever been mistaken for narcissism? Oh, I'm sure that it has. Yeah. I think the difference, though, is, there tends to be, if you're talking more like autism spectrum kind of stuff, there might be this kind of, maybe lack of empathy, or a person's kind of lost in themselves, and they're just doing their own thing. It doesn't tend to come across as selfish and abusive. It just tends to come across as kind of maybe some kind of strange social skills, or an inability to relate. So there's kind of this impaired empathy that's going on. The presentation tends to come across as very different. Narcissism, it tends to be, especially that overt narcissism, tends to be arrogant, grandiose, brash, exhausting. Like, it's just all about them all of the time. The covert narcissism, I mean, it's entitled, it's bratty is what it is. Like, it's just bratty behavior in an adult. Whereas people that are more like on that autism spectrum tend to not come across like that. But that's not to say that a person can't have more than one thing going on with them. I mean, a person can have what would be considered like a quote unquote mental disorder, like autism. They could also have a personality disorder, and they could also have a mental illness. So a person could have Asperger's, and they could have borderline personality disorder, and they could have schizophrenia, and they could be diabetic, and they could have cancer, and they could have high blood pressure, right? So like, a person can have a whole host of things going on with them. And this is another thing that I don't know if very many people realize. Like, there's just all different kinds of things. Most people are complex organisms. And I think it's almost rare, especially these days, that a person just has like one thing going on with them. So it's confusing too, when you're talking about potential like developmental delays or developmental disabilities, and potential, mental illness and personality disorder. And you could also throw in addiction on there too. So trying to sort out, okay, well, what am I dealing with? Am I dealing with the person who has Asperger's? Is the Asperger's the problem? Or is it their alcoholism that's the problem? Or is it their bipolar that's the problem? Or, kind of which piece of that? And so for a clinician, that's like they'll start trying to figure out, okay, which is it? So that person's probably going to be encouraged to get and stay sober, so they can see, okay, after that person has enough clean time under their belt, then what are they dealing with? So then you can kind of rule out, okay, it's not substance abuse. Okay, so now, is it developmental delays? Is it the mental illness, or is it the personality disorder? So then, okay, now you're moving on to the mental illness. Okay, so let's get this person on the right combination of medication for their mental illness. How is that handling it? Are there changes within personality? And, 9 times out of 10, maybe not even that high, but like oftentimes mental illness can be effectively treated. And so then if the person's on the right kind of medication, then once they're stabilized, now what does their personality look like? But there's a difference between kind of mental illness type behaviors and personality disorder type behaviors. Personality disorder type behaviors tend, when a person has like mental illness kind of stuff, it tends to go in waves, and they tend to be very different when they're on the right combination of medication. So that kind of, those outrageous behaviors are not there when they're stabilized. So then you realize, okay, this person might be bipolar, but you know, if they've got the right combination of stuff going on, then their bipolar is not, it's not the cause of what's going on. And generally you can kind of tell anyhow, because it's, you know, the mania, the depression, the, you know, kind of odd thinking, the magical thinking, the, you know, kind of bizarre connections, the paranoia, like that's still not like the personality disordered stuff, which tends to be, you know, very manipulative, lying, cheating, stealing, character stuff, like deeper seated stuff. So, and if a person's doing like lying and cheating and stealing and doing all that kind of stuff, that tends to not be mental illness. Like that's more personality stuff. So, and medication doesn't help with that. But it's difficult to sort it all out. Okay, let me. Yes, totally. I agree. Fly Free says, I work with toddlers on the autism spectrum. These individuals can change, develop healthy I'm losing it. Develop healthy boundaries, resolve their destructive, unhealthy behaviors with time and therapy. Yes. And that's the difference too. Like, and I've worked with autistic children, with autistic teenagers, and even then, like I've worked with very behavioral, like teenagers that were on the autism spectrum that were very aggressive. This one girl in particular would just turn on a dime, and she would just she just didn't know how to regulate her emotions. And if she had cramps, if she was having a bad day, if she was overstimulated, what have you, she would just like attack people. I mean, she would rush people and wrestle you to the ground and try to pull your hair. And she was just she'd go from 0 to 10 very quickly. But even that kind of stuff, like even though it's personal, like you're being attacked, you can tell like this is how she's handling kind of life stressors. And then if it wasn't you, it would be somebody else, you know? But yes, like different kinds of, there's like treatment plans, there's generally progress that's made. And even with people that are on the autism spectrum that are not so severe as that, generally it's more of like, they just didn't realize certain things. Like they're just not picking up certain social cues. So if you let them know, hey, kind of, this is what's going on, or, you know, maybe you're standing too close, or do you see what I'm saying? Like kind of whatever might be going on, they generally will change their behavior. So it's very different is from what I've experienced. Okay, let me. Gamer Christina says, I'm autistic and my ex really bashed me for it. I would believe it. I think that this is what they tend to do. It's anything, if you're with that kind of person that likes to grind you down, they will pick either things that they know a person's really sensitive about. It's like any bully out there, right? They'll pick things that you're either really sensitive about or things that they're jealous of. So if let's say you're a really great piano player, they might start telling you, I can't handle that. That's so noisy. You have no talent. Quit doing that. Or if you want to go back to school, that's a waste of money. You know, you're too old. You shouldn't go. You're never going to amount to anything anyhow. All of this kind of stuff to kind of get you to where you're not a threat. Or I've heard people struggling with like eating disorders. They're like, you know what? I really struggled with anorexia and my boyfriend knows it. And I've been doing fine. I'm at a healthy weight now. And I've been doing good for the past 5 years. I started dating this guy 6 months ago. He knew all about my anorexia and my history with eating disorders. And now all of a sudden he's making comments about my weight, telling me that I should really start to lose weight and this, that, and the other. And she's like, I'm a healthy weight. I don't need to lose any weight. And now it's making her question her sanity. And like, that's some like deeply sadistic stuff to really try to mess with the person on that kind of a level, you know? But yeah, anything that makes you, that's either a perceived vulnerability or something that they know that they can get to you with. Like if a person does have mental illness or is autistic, sort of blaming that. Or if you have even PMS, like, oh, you're just too emotional, you're just too sensitive, or you just don't understand, or you're the problem, you're crazy, it's because you're bipolar. So it's that, you need a therapist, you need medication, that kind of stuff. And it's really difficult for a person, when there's kind of that seeming kernel of truth to things where you're like, well, that could, like, maybe it is my bipolar, maybe it is my autism, maybe it is, the anorexia. Like, it can be easy for a person to kind of get caught up in that confusion and then to wonder, like, who has the issue? Is it them or is it me? And that's why I kind of default back to, I would really encourage you guys to avoid situations where you're questioning, where it's rattling your sanity like that. If you're having to wonder who has the issue, is it them or is it me? And getting lost in that confusion and that mental anguish can be a very scary, very dangerous, very slippery slope. When you're with people that are your people, that have your best interests in mind, they don't cause feelings like that. So think about how do you feel when you're with people that have good intentions? Odds are you either feel good or you feel neutral. Like you're just relaxed. Like you can just kind of be yourself. You're not walking on eggshells. You're not trying to carefully select the words that you choose. You're not trying to tiptoe around topics. You're not bracing yourself to be knocked off balance by some sort of comment or attack. You're not feeling introspective. You're not feeling, is it them or is it me? Like there's not all of this stuff going on. You just feel comfortable, like when you're with your people, like it's just easy, comfortable. And they might even bring up, like you might fight with somebody from time to time, or they might bring up issues or concerns from time to time. But even then, it doesn't cause perpetual confusion. It doesn't cause mental anguish. It doesn't cause where it like rattles your faith in yourself. Do you see what I'm saying? Like there's a difference, and that their goal is to kind of work towards that solution of, this is what I'm seeing within you. I'm concerned. And also, I think the history with that person is enough that you can feel comfortable in their concerns. Does that make sense? Yes, great point. Fly Free makes the point of, yes, so narcissistic people really can't resolve or change their unhealthy behaviors. Yes, if somebody is continuing to fight the reality, if you're like, dude, this is not cool, like these are my boundaries, if you're having to continually like justify, argue, explain, and defend yourself, if you can't seem to get through to them, if they're blaming you for everything, if, especially for setting boundaries, right? Like if you set a boundary or question them, and then all of a sudden they accuse you of being manipulative or abusive or, inconsiderate or rude, like that person's a million miles away from changing. Like they're not even aware that there's a problem. And so change isn't possible until they are aware that there is a problem. And some people never become aware that there's a problem. And that's the big challenge with narcissism, is if a person is so incredibly emotionally immature and selfish and entitled, they don't get it. Like they don't get it. It's really difficult. And that's the other thing too, is they might get that one thing. Like you might be able to pull them under the light, kicking and screaming, and they finally understand that this is a problem. They're probably still not going to understand that it's a problem for the reasons that you and other people think it's a problem. Just sort of like a sociopath may finally go to jail, but in their mind, the problem isn't so much that they stole a car. The problem is more that they got caught. And so even then it can be really difficult to try to point out to them like, hey, continuing to like lie and cheat and exploit other people and do all of this stuff is a problem. They still might not get it. And so this is why, Richard Grannon had once said, like, it's just different layers of the game, because it really is. So they might stop doing that one thing, but then odds are they're going to do something equally as destructive, but in a different way. Because to them, they don't have the problem. Like everybody else has the problem. They don't have the problem. And so they're going to continue, because it's a character issue. It's personality. If a person has no moral compass, they're going to continue doing whatever they want to do, kind of dependent upon which way the wind blows. So like you can try explaining to a person, hey, we're married, cheating is not okay. It's not okay that you flirt. It's not okay that you don't come home for days on end. It's not okay that you come home late. It's like, I expect you to act like you're married. And it's just, oh God, it's exhausting for me to even think about. Like, it's just the lies and the manipulations and the deceit and the nonsense and the foolishness and it doesn't end. And so you can drag them to the light with the one situation, and they might apologize profusely for the one affair, but that doesn't mean that a dozen more aren't going to follow that, because to them, they're just giving lip service. Like, okay, you want me to tell you that I'm sorry? Fine, I'll tell you that I'm sorry, or whatever. Just get off my back. Like, I don't want to deal with it. But then it'll come up again and again, like in their mind, it's the whole, but look at what you made me do. Like it's everybody else's fault. Well, yeah, I cheated. She was hot. She threw herself at me. Yeah, I cheated. You were never home. Yeah, I cheated because I was drunk. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's like, there's always an excuse. Like it's like dealing with the teenager, like a really bratty, uninsightful teenager. It's exhausting. You can't, like, there is no working with that. Lilith says, my ex-narc never once said he was sorry for anything ever. Yes, I dated this one guy for a while who would not say he was sorry. And he also wouldn't ever say thank you. It was the weirdest thing. And I remember at the time, like, I had never encountered an adult who would not say either one of those two things. Like he would, and we had many a conversation about that. I'm like, that's so, like, you owe me an apology. Like you did X, Y, and Z, and then it just became this standoff where it was like, this is outrageous. Like you seriously won't apologize for this, and it was like dealing with a bratty little child, but then the weirder thing to me, because that situation didn't happen that often, where we were like even really fighting about stuff. It was just like stonewalling. That's what I would get, like stonewalling or a lack of apology. The not ever saying thank you was really strange. And then another thing that he did, which was also really strange, was he would not cuss. I just thought that was really strange. Just quirky, like very, very quirky. Not that a person like needs to cuss, but to really go out of their way to not cuss was just very strange to me. Yeah. Inner Fire says, yep, narcissists don't apologize. They say things like, I don't have to apologize. I have nothing to apologize for, or you did it to yourself. Yeah. Yep. Because in their mind, they're never wrong. And I guess I could see it, right? Like if you really think that everything that you do is a response to the world around you, like, yeah, I cheated. She was hot. She threw herself at me. Yeah, I cheated. I had a beer. I was drunk. Yeah, I cheated. You weren't home. In their mind, yeah, they had really legit reasons for everything that they did. But that's the problem. Like it's only if you lack a moral compass, then all of that seems legitimate. But to a person with a moral compass, you're like, okay, but you're married. So even if a hot chick throws herself at you, that means you still don't sleep with her. Like that's the piece that's missing, is like the moral compass. So if in their mind, they're like, the situation presented itself, therefore I did it. You forgot to buy kitty litter at the store. That's why I flew into a rage and pushed you into the wall and broke your arm. Like it's all your fault. If you hadn't bought, if you bought kitty litter, like this wouldn't have happened. But it doesn't work that way. Like the rest of us realize like you're an adult, you have to be able to like modulate your behavior. So just because you're frustrated, somebody cut you off in traffic is not a reason to go ram their car or to flip them off or to, follow them home and bust out their windshield. Like, okay, they did that. That wasn't very nice, but now you need to handle it like an adult. But they don't understand that. Like, the guy cut me off in traffic, so I shot him. Not my fault. Like, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm like, you can't work with that. Because even if you drug them to see the light on that one issue, it's the thinking that's driving that behavior that's the deeper problem. So by addressing that behavior one at a time, it's like that old carnival game, that whack-a-mole, where the mole would pop up and you had the mallet. Do you guys remember this? And like you'd whack the mole and then but another one would pop up and then you whack the mole and then another one would pop up and they kept popping up and the whole game was to see how many moles you could whack. That's what it's like dealing with the behavior of a narcissist. Is the moles never stop popping up and you're going to continue, you're behind the ball every single time. And even if you get one good, you've only addressed that one. But the deeper problem is it's the mindset that's driving all of that, So, okay. Vegan Yogi says, yep, he used that line. Well, women present me with an opportunity. It destroyed me to hear it. I'm so happy that's in the past now. Yes. Yes. Thanks. Samuel says, your analogies are always so spot on. Well, thank you. I try. Maria, yes, well said, says, now I just ask myself, Maria, do you feel safe, happy, comfortable, and trusting with this person? And I say, don't rationalize crap if you feel lonely, invested, etc. That's so true. Like, how do you feel? Your people, right? That 10% of people out there, your people, that's how you feel around them. You feel accepted for who you are. You feel safe being who you are. You feel comfortable expressing yourself. You feel, happy. Like, hey, man, like you enjoy it, right? Like you enjoy it. You're like, man, I really like hanging out with this person. We have the greatest time together. Like it's comfortable. It's happy. It's trusting. Like you can open up. You can be vulnerable, which like that's where it's at, right? Like that's the kind of soil for you to grow. It's when it feels like Are you bracing yourself to be knocked off balance? Do you feel distrusting? Do you feel tense? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel a sense of dread or doom when you see their car pull into the driveway? Do you feel exhausted? Do you find yourself making excuses for them or for not wanting to see them? Do you feel fear? Do you feel obligation or guilt? All of these things are signals that these are not your people. Salon asks, I'm curious, Morningstar is such a beautiful surname. Is that really Dana's surname? Yes, that really is. I changed my last name, to my mother's last name, her maiden name. So it's, yeah, my mom's last name and my grandmother's last name. So yeah, interestingly enough, real quick about the last name, YouTube is such an interesting place. Let me just tell you. So every now and again, I get people, because there's a show out there about called Lucifer Morningstar, and it was, I don't know, I forget what channel it was on. Kind of this, I don't know, cheesy little show. It was silly. Anyways, people were freaking out. They're like, okay, like Morningstar is one of the names for the devil. Does that mean, like, are you the devil? And no, I'm not. But it was also one of the names that was, interestingly enough, in the Bible, that was also given to Jesus. Not to say that I'm Jesus, like, rest assured, I am neither one of those two. So like, you guys are good. But it's just interesting, like people's concerns about that. So YouTube. So let me scroll up. Very Grumpy asks, Dana, can a strong codependent suffering from PTSD get misdiagnosed as a borderline with narcissistic traits? Oh, sure. People can be like misdiagnosed with anything. I mean, anything. My uncle had pancreatic cancer, and that was misdiagnosed as the flu until it was stage 4, and he died a month later. That's an extreme one. But so you think about that in terms of like physical diagnoses. And then you think about personality stuff is even less of a science. Like, it truly is an art form. So that clinician is going to be looking at, okay, what kind of behaviors are they seeing in this kind of snapshot in time? And what's really common is for a person to be traumatized, because trauma is transformative. When a person is fresh out of trauma, they are not themselves. They are oftentimes hysterical. They are incredibly emotional, and they're just like radical personality changes. And especially when you're dealing with PTSD, especially like that kind of complex PTSD, which is more like emotional in nature, versus PTSD, which is more like event driven. So people that tend to have that CPTSD oftentimes don't realize it, because they don't realize that they were abused. They don't realize what happened. They just know that they feel like they're an emotional wreck, and they're having nightmares. They're having anxiety. They're wanting to isolate. They're having trouble trusting people, and they feel very different. They might even feel like they have PTSD, but they think, well, that's not possible. I didn't go to war, or I wasn't in anything really like traumatic. This person was just nuts and I got tangled up with them. But they don't realize that like an abusive relationship, especially if it's emotional or psychological, or any type of abuse really, can cause PTSD. And so they know that they feel like they're an emotional hot mess. And so they're oftentimes trying to find help, but they don't have like they don't know what's going on. And so then trying to tell like a clinician what's going on tends to come out as like this frantic, jumbled, guarded, confused mess. And so the clinician's like, well, because what they're seeing is like, well, this person really has kind of a fragmented sense of identity. They're having poor emotional regulation. They're having a lot of these symptoms that on the surface look like borderline personality disorder. But the piece that they're really missing is, did this person have these same behavior? Like, when did these behaviors surface? Has this person been like this for quite a while, or was it only after this relationship? But because if the clinician's only seeing that person in that snapshot in time, they're not going to know that. And the person who's traumatized, and so the clinician might not think to ask, because they don't know. Like, they're like, is this person just like this, or did something happen? And the person that's traumatized is probably not going to offer up, yes, my clinical presentation is new. It started about 6 months ago after, you know what I mean? Like, they're not going to understand what happened and be able to kind of present the clinician, a more accurate, fuller picture of like what's going on. And so it's very common for PTSD to run hand in hand with borderline personality disorder. And it's also very common for PTSD to cause borderline personality disorder. So especially if a person goes through, it's really kind of thought that personality disorders in general are caused from trauma in childhood. So most personality disorders, some sort of traumatic event or events happen, and then the child starts developing all of these like kind of maladaptive ways of coping, and then these kind of in turn end up forming what's known as a quote unquote personality disorder. It's a little bit different if they're an adult, because then it's not so much their personality, like their personality hasn't formed around the trauma so much. So it's like they've grown up, they have their personality as an adult. This trauma happens. Now they feel like they're blown apart and they're an emotional hot mess, but that's not their personality. What's really going on is they're having a very normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. And here's kind of the like danger of these kinds of labels. It can feel absolutely emotionally devastating to a person to find out that they have PTSD or that they have borderline personality disorder. I mean, it can drive a person to suicide. So it's really important for clinicians to really be mindful of telling a person about labels like this, because a person, what do you think? Like, when a person thinks about PTSD, they think of kind of the shell-shocked war vet who can't function in society, who's pushing a shopping cart and, is having flashbacks all the time. Nobody wants to be like that, right? And so it can feel very defining and very limiting of it can really strip away a person's future, because they think, oh no, then that's what I'm going to become. So what's the point? And same thing with borderline personality disorder. If you go through an abusive relationship and I talk about this in my book, my concerns with this, because so many targets of abuse are constantly told, you're crazy, you're the problem, you need therapy, you need medication, you're too sensitive. And then if the person actually does get into therapy, and then the therapist is seeing this clinical presentation of what really is trauma, but they don't recognize it as that, they're like, okay, because they're going to formulate their treatment plan. And so generally, and depending on kind of, I guess, what kind of therapist you're seeing and under what conditions. But for us, all of our patients, we had a treatment plan. And so you had to put something down, like there had to be some sort of diagnosis. And generally, in order for insurance to cover it, there needs to be some sort of diagnosis. So you have all kinds of like, I think now it's switched to like the ICD-10 codes. So you have codes. So it's, I forget what they are, but like the more codes, the more things can be covered by insurance. But if a patient sees that and they're like, oh my God, I'm really sick. I have, generalized anxiety disorder. They have all these different codes, like 128.5. And I have, possibly, mood disorder, unspecified mood disorder. And I have borderline personality disorder, and I have PTSD, and I have, clinical depression. And there's all of these different codes there. If a patient sees that, that can just be absolutely devastating, because they think, oh my God, I'm really, really sick. What's so wrong with me? But the reality is it's that clinicians looking at those behaviors that they're seeing at that time, and they're trying to get as many visits generally covered as possible. So these diagnoses can be very fluid. I guess that's what I'm saying. So unlike cancer, right? Or like a broken arm, it's kind of like there is no being half pregnant with that. Like you either kind of have it, you either have it or you don't. Unlike with different like psychiatric diagnoses, this person might be presenting with behaviors that look like, schizoaffective or bipolar or borderline personality. That clinician's going to put together some sort of treatment plan for that. So for borderline, they might say like, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of like kind of borderline type features. So in order to get the dialectical behavioral therapy covered, they're going to put, which frankly, all of us could benefit from because it's fantastic. They might put that down. So just because, so that's covered, So the benefit of diagnoses is they're pointers, but they're not concrete, and they're not the end all be all. And psychiatry in general, it's a very new science. And I think it's good to kind of look at behaviors in terms of behaviors, like, okay, this is valid, like this is a problem. And frankly too, the DSM is moving, it's been trying to move for a while away from I guess towards more like, I think it's called like person-centered language. So allowing that person like room instead of being classified as a diagnosis. So for example, the difference would be, instead of calling a person like, oh, that person they're a schizophrenic, or they're a borderline, or they're a narcissist, to more behavioral classifications. So instead of defining the person, you're defining the behavior. So instead of saying this person is a schizophrenic, to this is a person who has schizophrenia. Instead of saying this is a person who has, who is a borderline, to this is a person who has borderline personality disorder. Or instead of saying this is a person, this is a narcissist, this is a person who either has narcissistic personality disorder, or this is a person who has a lot of narcissistic behavior. And there's pros and cons with that too. So they're working towards kind of revamping this, because there are pros and cons with it. So like one of the pros with that is it's not so limiting. Like your person's not so defined by their diagnoses. But then the downside is, especially kind of working on the other side of it, when you're working with people, okay, does this person has like antisocial traits? Okay, But what are we talking about? Like, where on the spectrum is that? Are we talking antisocial and the fact that they have like domestic violence charges against them, or that they've stolen a car, or have they like, raped a child, or have they murdered somebody? Like, where on that spectrum is it? So there's still a lot of room. It'll be interesting to see kind of where the DSM evolves and where it goes in like the next probably actually realistically, probably 10 or 20 years, because they only update it every couple of years. And even then it takes another couple years for it to people actually just to change over to it. That was a very long answer. I hope that wasn't too rambling. Yes, Kevin, great point. Says when you have a broken bone, there is a certainty that you will be healed in a relatively short amount of time. When you're dealing with the mind, there is a degree of wondering if you will ever heal. Yes, absolutely. There's a relatively kind of new budding branch of psychology, which is very exciting, called positive psychology. And the difference being is traditional psychology really came from the point of view of we all have our own baseline for normal. So you have your baseline for like how you function, kind of, how functioning are you is really what it is. Like, what's your baseline for normal? And so traditional psychology was more about, okay, if something happened to a person, to then get them to return to that baseline of their degree of normal. But positive psychology, which I love, they're like, you know what? Why are we shooting for that? Like, let's shoot high. Like, forget about returning a person to normal. Let's make this trauma that they underwent, make it really, truly transformative and take it way above their baseline. And so it's very much trying to squeeze out as much like personal growth and as much possible. So if a person does undergo some sort of trauma, that they can use it as stepping stones to really super like blow past their level of their baseline and move to a really high new level. So like I said, all of this stuff is ever evolving and very interesting. Let's see here. Phil asks, hey, Dana, can you touch base on the topic of a narcissist following us here while we seek treatment? Well, yeah. And just for clarity's sake, like this is just support. Like this is just people, support. So, definitely would recommend like treatment with somebody who is, from what I've heard, people rave about is EFT treatment and EMDR are kind of the two big ones as far as working through trauma. So I would encourage you, like that is some good treatment, and support groups can be great to just give and get support. So with that said, here's the thing with the internet is there is no safe space, and it's no support group is safe. Like there's going to be, and probably they're oftentimes a place for a lot of predators that are attracted. Predators are probably very attracted to support groups. It's the perfect storm, right? You've got a lot of vulnerable people, you have a lot of very trusting people, you have a lot of scared people. And so it's kind of this ripe hunting ground for predators. YouTube, Facebook, you name it. So I always encourage people, be aware of like what you're putting out there on the internet, and, use a fake name, create a fake account, create multiple fake accounts. Don't, and it's hard to think straight when you've been manipulated and you're confused and you're trying to recover from this, but to create a fake account and just use that for being on YouTube or, participating in different support groups or these kinds of things. Like, don't use your real account, because with a few clicks, they can figure out who you are and they can follow you in there. So if privacy is a concern, use the fake account. But yes, I would anticipate that. I would anticipate that either the abuser themselves is following you around, or that they have flying monkeys that are spying on you. Kind of a quick way to see what all is out there is to Google your screen name or your real name. So do a Google search on that and see what comes up. And then to log out of Facebook and to search for yourself and see what shows up. A lot of people, myself included, I'm continually surprised by what comes up, especially with Facebook, because they're constantly changing their privacy settings and how they do things. Like, stuff that I'll think nobody else can see, turns out other people can see. And then I'm like, oh my God, I did not realize that. Like, how embarrassing, like that was not my intention for anybody to see that. So it's good. It's good to be aware of like what other people can see. Missouri Cowboy says, Dana, can you talk about your next book, the format and contrast, kind of, and contrast emotions versus intuition as an example? So the second book, so the first book, Start Here. And if you're just now joining us, I figured out a way to do a book promo thing. So for the next 3 days, starting tonight at midnight, I'm not sure where Amazon is located, but probably, I don't know, Central Time, maybe. So for the next 3 days, so November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, my first book, Start Here, is going to be free. So you can grab that on Amazon, and I will put a link down below in the comment section in the description. Yeah, in the description area, actually, there is already a link to the book. So you'll be able to get that book for free for the next 3 days. So grab it while you can. So that book, the first book, is all about kind of frequently asked questions. It's definitions. It's lots of examples. It's just chock full of the fundamentals. And it really, like, the subtitle is, it's a crash course to understanding, navigating, and healing from narcissistic abuse. And it really is. Like, if I were to give a person a book and just say, literally, like, just start here, like, read all this and then let's talk, then ask me some questions. That book is going to get you caught up to speed with, a lot. Like, it's everything that you really need to know to have a good footing in all of this. And the second book dives deeper into a lot of, like, where I see people, myself included, getting tripped up. So the second book, it's a compare and contrast, and what I call thought holes, which are a lot like potholes, but for your thinking. And it's basically well-intended bad advice. So it compares and contrasts, what is the difference between love bombing and love, or commitment and codependency, or, a parent versus a predator, or friend versus somebody being friendly, or the difference between silent treatment and no contact. That's a good one that people get tripped up on. Forgiveness, and I think forgiving and forgetting is another one. There's a lot. There's like probably 50 different things that I compare and contrast in there to really kind of the whole goal is to give as much clarity as possible, and to see if anybody's kind of tangled up, because it's so easy to get. And it doesn't take much. It just takes that hitting one of those thought holes to send a person back into this cycle. And so that book really spells out the difference between these things, so like, crystal clear kind of what's a problem versus what's not a problem, and why. And the second book also has a ton of examples from, people that have shared personal, like little snippets of their own story. So there's lots of real life examples in there about kind of, a person's, what they used to think versus kind of what they now think and why, because that's the part that helps a person put the pieces together in all of this. So, both of those, but I think it'll be those, though. I really feel, and maybe I probably am biased because I wrote them, but like, I really think that they are going to really get people up to speed and in a way that is helpful and that'll shave years off of the learning curve for all of this. So basically it's the two books that I wished I had when I was going through all of this. It would have saved me a lot of hurt and heartache. So, and it's written from a survivor's perspective, and it's also written, like, I tried to keep multiple perspectives in mind as I was writing this to make sure that it was as clear as possible, but we will see. We will see. We'll see what people have to say and then make any changes as needed. And you'd asked about emotions versus intuition. Let me touch on that briefly. Is they're kind of one and the same in many ways. So our intuition, like what we call our gut instinct, is something that unfortunately has really kind of been like downgraded to something that's either like some sort of superstitious or hippie woo-woo, or that it's not really real. That logic and reason is where it's at. And that's the only thing that counts, as logic and reason. And that's stupid. Like, it just makes me so angry that we have gotten to that place as a society. It's just mind-boggling because it's so wrong. And it's not even just like hippie woo-woo wrong. Like, it's scientifically incorrect. So, intuition, your intuition. So the human brain it's basically three brains in one, I think is maybe the easiest way to think of it. So we all have like our reptilian brain. This is kind of the brain stem, the most basic brain. It's the oldest brain that we have. And that brain, reptiles have it. It's an instinctual brain, very fight, flight, kind of controls breathing, heart rate, kind of the basics of body functions and reaction. And then you have the mammalian brain, the mammal brain, the dog brain is what it's normally known as. That's the emotional brain. It's also known as the limbic system. It's the largest part of our brain. And so then the limbic system, the emotional brain, kind of grew around the reptile brain. And so kind of stacks on top of each other, like scoops of ice cream. And then on top of that is the most recent part of our evolution, which is the prefrontal cortex. So this is your logic and your critical thinking brain. And it's what makes us human, is our logic and critical thinking. So there's a lot of beauty in logic and critical thinking, right? But each part of our brain serves its own function. And all of these different kind of mini brains talk to each other. And what they've found recently is it's not only that, but our brain also talks to the rest of our body, and the rest of our body talks to our brain. And this is primarily done through what's known as our vagus nerve. And our vagus nerve is also known as kind of the wandering nerve. And so it's really long. It stretches from our brain stem basically down to our colon, and it touches pretty much every major organ on its path down. So it kind of wanders around, its branches wander through our body. So what we call our gut instinct is that level of that deep sense of knowing. That's actually your they have found that there are signals in a person's stomach that they originally thought, like brain chemicals and receptors and all kinds of things that they originally thought were only in our brain, that they're now finding are also in a person's stomach. And so literally, like your brain and your stomach are talking to each other. So if something is feeling off, it's going to register at those two brains first. That reptilian level, that's that primitive, like you sense fear, you sense danger, you don't know why. Because we human beings tend to think that we process information from like the top down. Like we see a problem and then we interpret it down, and it's not. We really interpret reality. We interpret our surroundings from the bottom up, meaning from like the reptile brain to the emotional brain to the logic and critical thinking part of our brain. Now, here's where it gets kind of glitchy, is because it's going to process things. And this stuff happens, in like a fraction of a second. But because we're only aware of our logic and critical thinking part of our brain, we're not aware of the stuff that's deeper. And so stuff that sets off those other alarm systems, if it doesn't make sense to our logical and critical thinking brain, it's like our brain, it doesn't compute. And so the human brain is just such a fascinating thing. It's like it's always scanning for how to keep you safe. And it's always trying to kind of link up like meaning and kind of, just perceiving things. And so when we have that gut instinct that something is off, it's sort of like a pregnancy test. Like it's really easy or common to get a false negative, but you're not going to get a false positive. Because like, for example, like with a pregnancy test, it's screening for a certain hormone. What is it? I forget the HGC or HCG hormone. So if that hormone's not present, then the test isn't going to be positive. So same with your brain, like it's screening for stuff. It's really easy to get a kind of a false negative, but it's really difficult to get a false positive. So it's screening for fear. It's screening for a problem. If the problem's like, you might be paranoid or feel hypervigilant. So it might be seeing something that's there, but it's generally not going to sense danger when there really, truly is no danger present. And that's one of the reasons I encourage people, err on the side of caution. Because you've got the two oldest parts of your brain working. And just because your logic and critical thinking part of your brain doesn't understand it, doesn't mean that it's still not legitimately an issue. And because what happens is, here's the thing too, with people, this is what trips all of us up, is we all think that we are rational creatures, right? That we use logic and reason. And so we need that concrete proof. We need proof that it is logical to cross the street if somebody's behind us, or like, if we're sensing danger, it has to make sense to us. But the reality is, because so much of this information doesn't make its way to our logic and critical thinking part of our brain, it's either just it just dissipates at that level where we don't process it. And I'm talking things like micro expressions is probably a very common one. So things that are logic and critical thinking part, or mirroring. Like the logical and critical thinking part might not be familiar with like what exactly is mirroring, what exactly is, what did I just say? Micro expressions. But the base part of your brain knows this, that it can tell when something's off. So like micro expressions they're little flashes of emotion that cross a person's face. They're very difficult for a person to fake, and they give off all kinds of signals to us. So like, for example, I think contempt or disdain would be kind of like a sneer, just like, ugh, like that, kind of like just the sneer of disgust. So it's just something that flashes across a person's face. It might just be something subtle, like, yeah, I'm totally great. Oh, that's good for you. Like it's just, and it's probably even more subtle than that. Like it's just a flash. If you're not aware of, hey, that's the micro expression for contempt or disdain, it's probably, you're not going to register it as such, but you'd still register at a deeper level of there's a problem here. Something's really off. Or it's the way that somebody might look at you, or they look at the waitress, or they look at your child. And it could, and again, the stuff is so subtle and it happens so quickly. It can be easy to think that we're somehow paranoid or misreading things or being too sensitive or have seen too many movies or what have you. But the reality is, no, we picked up on something, but we just can't pinpoint what it is. So that's why it's so important to err on the side of caution, because odds are we don't sense danger unless we're in danger. We don't tend to sense that something's off unless something's really off. You don't think about how you are around other people. You tend to not think, do you walk around wondering, because generally it's very specific. We're like, boy, I really kind of wonder if this guy is gay that I'm dating, or I really wonder if I feel like my life might be in danger. Or I kind of wonder if he has a thing for underage girls. Like our concern or hesitation tends to be, even though that might seem kind of vague, it's still like specifically vague. And if you think about that, like, do you wonder these things about other people in your life? Like odds are you don't. Odds are it's just them. So if you're wondering, if you're having these kind of like, oh, that's kind of weird. I'm afraid that I might be in danger. Like odds are you don't feel that way unless you really are. So, so all of your emotions, our intuition is such a huge thing, and it's so important that we honor it because it's there for a reason. It's our animal instinct is what it really is. And we have gotten too big for our britches is what it is. And we tend to think, oh, well, no. We don't go based off of instincts anymore. We are refined people. We use logic and reason, right? And you're like, dude, you're missing seriously like 90% of what's going on in the world if you're not in tune with those deeper parts of your brain, because they're processing so much more information than your logical and critical thinking part of your brain is. Like I said, all that stuff, you process information from the bottom up, not the top down. And so and it's filter. There's so many filters that it funnels through before it even gets up to that logic and critical thinking part. And by then we've been able to like deny or justify or rationalize or minimize or what have you, to where, but then the thing is, and this goes back to the emotion part, is like, you can justify and rationalize and deny and try to talk yourself out of it and think, oh, it's just you, that you've got all these issues. But that limbic system, your emotional brain knows better, and it knows that you're in danger. And so these other emotions continue to keep trying to bubble up to get your attention. That anxiety, discomfort, frustration, irritation, hesitation, concern, second guessing yourself, introspection, depression, mental anguish. And these feelings, they get louder and louder and louder over time, and to that point where a person generally is like, I can't do this anymore. And they still might not know what's wrong, but their emotional brain at a deeper level knows something's off. So it's not just like women's intuition or, hippie woo woo. It's a legit thing. Okay. Let me see here. Phil says, Dana, I love your pretend accent when speaking about that. Yeah. But right, like it's so, we're so silly that way. like thinking that we just have it all figured out. And it's like, no, there's so much going on. Little Miss says, I just kind of thought I don't need my intuition if I have strict, strong boundaries. To me, they're one and the same, because in order, I think to really set healthy boundaries, it's that feedback loop. It's paying attention to how you feel, because that'll give you all the information that you need. It'll let you know if something's working or not working for you. So like you might have strict, strong boundaries for maybe some of the more like kind of more obvious stuff. Like, okay, I'm not gonna put up with somebody who's cheating. I'm not gonna put up with somebody who yells at me. I'm not gonna work in an environment where I feel unsafe, like that kind of stuff. But if it's kind of more subtle stuff, like saying yes when you mean no, or like I think in order to really have boundaries that work, we've got to be in tune with how we feel. And so paying attention to, am I feeling drained? Am I feeling, just kind of what's going on? Like what, am I feeling stressed out? Am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling tense? Am I feeling resentful? Am I feeling angry? Resentment is probably a big one to watch for. That's a sure sign that a boundary has been violated. And that's the thing, like nobody else knows where your boundaries are except for you. So if you're feeling resentful, then that's the feedback of, okay, I need to be doing some things differently because I'm saying yes when I really mean no. And then figuring out, okay, what needs to change. So it just takes practice. It takes practice getting, I still, catch myself where I'm like, man, how did I not, like, how did I miss that? I just got a massage the other day, and every time I get a massage, I can, like, I talk about this, like, I can kind of feel it coming on, like, okay, my neck's starting to really hurt. And if I'm like rubbing, these muscles here, that's a sign. If I'm having to really roll my shoulders, if I feel like my shoulders are up high, like that's a sign. And so even like physical stuff that's more concrete that we can point to, it's just amazing, like how quickly a problem becomes normal. And so then I get this massage, and I left there feeling, I'm like, oh my God, I feel amazing. I feel like this is how I don't feel pain. I don't feel tension. It's how nice, but it's interesting. And it's the same thing with like emotional situations in our life where, we get used to it and don't realize that it's a problem. But just paying attention. And it's so easy to get so down on ourselves about kind of these quote unquote bad emotions or uncomfortable emotions, thinking that we need to get rid of them. Oh, I'm anxious, I need to go take an anti-anxiety medication. Or, oh, I'm depressed, I need an antidepressant. Or, oh, I am, can't sleep, or I'm eating too much, or I'm not eating enough, or I'm in pain, or I'm, like anything that we're doing, it's really a good idea to examine why, because odds are those emotions are there for a reason. And the way that you're coping with those emotions is also there for a reason. So if you can, and it's difficult, I mean, it's so difficult to do when we're in it, but like if you can really slow things down enough to examine kind of what's going on here, and, why am I coping in this specific way? There's just so much more that drives our behavior that we're just not aware of, like, interesting. Okay. AJ asks, Dana, what is your take on forgiveness towards them, specifically the ones who portray themselves to be the victim? My take on forgiveness is I really don't give people, if a person's hurt me in a way that is a deal breaker, they've treated me with, contempt, disdain, hostility, aggression. They've really shown me that we're not on the same team. They don't get a second chance. So, if they've ever been like abusive or exploitative like that, they don't get a second chance. Like those things nowadays are instant deal breakers. I don't even look back. I don't bother to try to clarify or to have a conversation or to try to get them to see the light or to try to get an apology. I'm done. So I guess for me, the way I view forgiveness is if a person hasn't done anything that's like deal breaker wise and they want to come back into my life and I'm okay with them coming back into my life, like they would need to be like fully own their behavior and have some sort of plan as to how they are never going to have that happen again. Then I would like quote unquote forgive them, and then I would, like re-enter that dynamic with them. 9 times out of 10 though, like I said, for me, when somebody really crosses a line, because somebody steals from me, if they cheat, if they lie, if they you know and I'm talking like outrageous lies and stuff. I mean, most people have like little white lies or whatever because they're not comfortable with the truth, but like damaging lies, that kind of stuff is a deal breaker. So it doesn't really matter to me if they apologize or not. So my perspective of forgiveness in that context has more to do with releasing anger against them. So, and forgiving myself, I guess, for staying as long as I did, or for not seeing their actions for as hurtful as they were, and for getting kind of taken by them. So I think the biggest part of forgiveness, it's to release the anger. And that's something that you don't need them to apologize for. You don't need, you definitely don't need to let them back into your life. Like I can release anger. And I'm always very careful about that. When people say, oh, well, you really need to forgive, I will tell people like, by forgive, do you mean release anger? Because if you mean that, then yes, that's a process. And that's something that I'm working on doing. And it is a process. And anger is a very valid stage in healing. And it does take a person a while and it's justified anger, or it's righteous anger. And so a lot of times people struggle with releasing anger because they're like, no, I need my anger. It's what's keeping me safe. If I wasn't angry at this person, then I would maybe try to make it work again. And I can't go through this hell anymore. So for a lot of people, it's almost safer to stay angry than it is to imagine living without that anger. But but that's where healthy boundaries kick in. Like you can release anger and still not let them in your life. If you have those deal breakers of, this is a done deal. If somebody treats me, X, Y, and Z ways, then I can still release anger, but I can still keep myself safe because I will never tolerate being treated like that again. It doesn't matter what they say or what anybody else says. I'm done. Okay. Yes, I agree. Inner Fire says, why do we need to forgive? Why do we need to have a project called forgiving somebody who has abused us? It's not about them, and we don't have to forgive them. Yes, it's what we do for ourselves. Yes. And so that's exactly what I mean. For me, when I talk about, and I don't even like to use the word forgiveness because it's so loaded and it's been so twisted and misused and abused that to me it doesn't stand for a lot of things that are healthy. What I see is the concept of forgiveness is very twisted to mean forget and allow. And, that's not healthy at all. So, yes, I agree. Forgiveness is for us. And because it's for us, we really don't need an apology or for them to own their behavior and us to move forward and heal. We can work towards healing, and we can work towards releasing that anger in terms of not letting that anger destroy us. In Buddhism, I think it was Buddha who talked about, having anger is a lot like holding on to a hot coal, trying to throw it at another person with the intention of hurting them. And the reality is all it does is hurt you. But a lot of people feel stuck, myself included, where you're like, I feel incredibly angry and my anger is righteous and validated. I don't think I want to get rid of it. I shouldn't have to get rid of it because it's righteous anger. But there is a place where that anger can absolutely destroy a person and it can harden them. So it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel how you feel. Just don't let that destroy your life. Don't let it consume you. And you can work towards, and I think one of the ways to work towards releasing that anger in a constructive way is to try to kind of squeeze out as much, make trauma is transformative, right? We've talked about that. All trauma is transformative, but it doesn't have to transform a person in a negative way. It feels like that at first, probably like the first year. It feels like this is really going to transform me in a negative way. I don't like who I am. I'm paranoid. I'm angry. I'm bitter. I have no fun to be around. I don't like who I've become. That's also, to me, that's a very normal stage in healing. So, because it's your whole world's blown apart, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Over time, if a person makes that declaration of, I'm not going to let this destroy my life, I'm going to take what happened and I'm going to use it for my highest and greatest good. There is a tremendous amount of power that's in anger. And you can take that anger, and if you can channel it, man, you can do anything. I mean, you can get into like the most amazing shape of your life. Like you can write a book, you can use it. It's like rocket fuel. Anger is like rocket fuel. And so it's up to you to decide, are you just going to self implode, or are you going to take that rocket fuel and help have that send you to catapult you, launch you into that next level? So when people talk about healing, they're like, okay, I'm upset because I wasn't who I've changed. I'm not like, here's my baseline. Like, I'm not this person anymore. And I'm really angry about that. And I want to be able to go back to this. I'm scared I'm never going to be able to heal. And I feel like part of my job in all of this is to get people to understand whenever there is trauma, physical trauma or emotional trauma, that level, what was there, will never be there. It's going to be different. It's going to be different. It doesn't have to be bad though. It's just going to be different. So like if there's physical trauma, let's say if a person cuts themselves, when that skin grows back, it's going to be scar tissue. It's not going to be the exact same as it was before, but it's going to be scar tissue. And in reality, scar tissue is a lot stronger. And with emotional stuff, healing doesn't mean going back to being the same person you were, because life is always about moving forward. Life is about growth. It's about your personal evolution. So there is no going back to whoever we were. There would be a problem if that was thank God that's not possible, although it might not feel like it right now. Like we might be mourning the loss of who we were, but you don't go back. You always go forward. And if you can, so there is no going back to who you were, but that doesn't mean that you can't catapult to the next level and that your life can't be even better and more amazing than before. It can. Just setting that as an intention is absolutely huge. And then let your brain start chewing on how to make that happen. So I hope that helps. Yeah. Lilith says, anger is a normal human reaction to injustice or abuse. Yes, it's one of the biggest signals of kind of our emotional guidance. I almost feel bad for people that it's important to get angry, right? Like it's important to get angry about certain things. I think it signals a level of dissatisfaction, and where there is contentment, there really isn't growth. So in a lot of ways that anger is good, because that's oftentimes one of the catalysts for us changing and for us doing something different. Phil says, okay, I don't feel so bad about my anger now. Thank you, Dana. Yes, you're very welcome. Use that anger, man. If you can harness it, if you can harness that and make it into rocket fuel, that's where it's at. I've told the story before. My brother, my younger brother, he developed fibromyalgia pretty young, like in high school. And so he had this kind of this ongoing, like debilitating pain for many, many years. And he was working at Starbucks because he had insurance there, and it was a pretty easy job, and, not a lot of stress, and, and he liked it. It was okay. And he really wanted to be a personal trainer. But he was so scared to get a job without insurance. And, what if he didn't get clients, and what if he couldn't cut it? And what if he got sick again? And like all of these things. And he was dating this girl, and it turns out she had been cheating on him like a lot. And he was devastated and angry. And he got to the point where he's like, you know what? Fine, screw it. And decided I've got nothing to live for. Like he was so at that breaking point that he decided, well, why not? And he went out and, without telling anybody, began studying for his personal trainer exam. And he's always been in like great shape his whole life. So he's always loved working out, and took the exam, and he passed it. And then he decided he got a job at a gym and began doing really, really well as a trainer. And it was interesting to hear him talk about it, because he's like, and he didn't tell any of us until like he'd kind of gotten established doing it. And he'd said, yeah, it was that breakup that caused him so much pain that it pushed him out of his comfort zone. And he's like, that's it. I've got to just do some stuff differently. Like I hate my life and I'm tired of it. And he did. And he radically changed his life. And that was one of the things that he had been telling me. He's like, Dana, there's so much energy and anger. Don't waste it. Don't waste it. You're at this kind of this sliver, this window that's a very kind of narrow window, where if you can harness all of the power of this, you can really radically transform your life in a positive way. Just, you got to give that anger a direction though. And he had a lot of clients as a trainer where people had come to him, like they'd hit this kind of emotional rock bottom, like their spouse had cheated, they lost their job, people were bullying them, they saw a picture of themselves, like there was some sort of rock bottom point where they're like, they got angry enough that they were like, I've got to do something different. And they would, show up at my brother's place, and then he would help them to like get into amazing shape. And so I don't know, like, and there's any number of ways that you can take that anger and make it work for you. You're in charge. That kind of goes back to that whole like logic and critical thinking part of your brain. Like that part is really in charge. if we can bring all of this stuff up to that level of awareness. So go for it. Okay. And we are, yeah, so true. Maria says, yep, trust the vibes, not the words. I saw a post on Instagram the other day about like what a different world it would be if we didn't see people, if we just saw their energy. And that was very profound, like kind of very hippie woo woo, but like, I mean, if you think about it, like if you just think about the different vibes of people that you encounter, on a daily basis, and just the people that are, like good vibes, like it's just that good energy of some people, or the calming energy of other people, or the energetic energy of some people, or most people that have come across like a psychopath will tell you that like it's dark energy. Even if they're not hippie woo woo, they're like, man, like I just got this dark vibe, and they will use that word dark. It's just like evil, like dark, low vibration kind of energy, scary stuff. So people pick up on vibes. We're just not used to thinking about it in that way, or using words to describe it in that way. Yep, totally. The Bam Fam says energy introduces you before you even walk into a room. Yeah. Yep. So interesting. Okay, guys. So I forgot to tell you, I need to put this in the comment down below. I am going on a little mini like friends retreat next week. So we're going to do the live stream on Tuesday instead of Wednesday, because I'm going to be gone Wednesday. So I will put that in the comment down below after I post this video. But Tuesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And next live stream. So with that said, we are way over time. So I apologize if anybody's got things to do or up late or whatnot. But let's take some time and just get grounded, and we will do kind of a little mini grounding thing here. So do what you need to do to just kind of get relaxed, find a comfortable spot, whether it's sitting or laying down or what have you. Let's just take a few breaths here. So take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And in through your nose. And out through your mouth. Let's do 5 more breaths. Go ahead and take a deep breath in. And as you exhale through your mouth, just release all of the tension from your forehead, from your eyes, from your cheeks, from your mouth, from your jaw, from your neck. Maybe just let your mouth kind of hang open a bit, just really releasing the tension from your jaw. And let your tongue fall from the roof of your mouth. Feel the tension just melt away from your face and how good it feels. Next, move to your shoulders, releasing the tension from your shoulders, letting them fall back, maybe letting your arms fall to your side. Just opening up your rib cage and your chest, letting the tension go from your shoulders, down your arms, down your forearms, letting your hands relax. Let them just kind of fall open, relaxing your fingers, and moving to your chest. As you continue to breathe and exhale, releasing any tension in your chest, in your abdomen, in your hips. Just letting your body just kind of be open, relaxed. Releasing any tension in your hips, in your quadriceps, in your knees, your calves, and your feet. Just letting your legs kind of fall in whatever way they want to fall. Just feeling completely relaxed and as though your body is just very heavy. Come just completely relaxed. No tension. It's just the stillness. Let's take a few more breaths here. Breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. And if you've never practiced breathing like this, where you can actually hear your breath, go ahead and try it. So breathe loudly. So breathe in through your nose. And then exhale loudly. And with each exhale, imagine yourself exhaling all of the tension, the stress, the worry, and blowing it away from your body. So breathing in with the good and exhaling all of the tension. Now, imagine a healing light start to grow. Imagine like a little flicker in the middle of your chest. Maybe it's just a little pinpoint of light. And imagine that light growing bigger and brighter and stronger. And imagine that light is your inner self. With each breath, that light grows bigger and bigger. The energy it's healing, it's powerful, it's calming, it's reassuring. And imagine that energy, that beautiful white light, as it just fills up your body, fills up your chest cavity, kind of spills over into your arms, travels up your neck, into your head, and down your chest, into your abdomen, and into your legs, to where you realize that that is you, that you are this light, that that is your inner energy. Now bring your attention to your hands. See if you can feel them tingling with that energy. And bring your attention to your feet and see if you can feel them tingling with this energy. And now bring your attention to the top of your head. See if you can feel it tingling with this energy. And notice if you feel that tingling sensation spreading throughout your body. Something else that's interesting that you might notice is that the more that you're aware of this energy feeling, the less you are aware of kind of where your body ends. That you might not really be able to feel kind of where your fingers are or where your arms, the shape of your arms, the shape of your legs, but that you can feel the energy inside of you and kind of, I don't know, 3 to 5 inches or so outside of your body. That there's kind of this blurring between the energy and your form. Okay, now imagine this energy as this healing, amazing, strong, positive energy. And now imagine sending it off into the world, sending it to other people, and possibly kind of imagining giving them kind of an energetic hug. So if there's anybody in your life that's maybe sick or that's hurting in some way, or that you just want to give a hug to let them know that it's going to be okay, to go to them now and give them a hug, an energetic hug. And when you're ready, come on back and make sure to give yourself a big energetic hug. And just acknowledging kind of all that you've been through and how strong you really are. And letting yourself know that it's going to be okay. That you're going to come out stronger for this and that you can do this. And when you're ready, come on back and open your eyes. Okay. Okay, welcome back. So, thank you so much for joining us. Yes, the chat turned into chaos while we were meditating, but I got the band hammer on the one. But yes. Yes, thank you, Malta. Thank you all. I wish everyone has a great week ahead. Thank you, you too. So I will see you guys Tuesday at 8:30 p.m. So we'll do it at a different day because I'm going to be gone. Tuesday next week, 8:30 p.m. Don't forget my book is going to be free for the next few days. So starting at maybe now, I don't know. I need to go over to Amazon and check the link, but I'll post a link down below once this video is finished processing. So you guys take care. I will see you later. As always, lots of love to you. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. So take care, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Good night.